My parents gave the family auto shop to my lazy younger brother. I was the one who kept it alive for years. So I left, took the customers, and let him sink it. Hey Reddit, I usually only lurk here, but things have gotten out of hand, so I figured I would post her. I'm 30 male Tyler. I grew up in New York town where everyone knew everyone else's last name, and where the only thing people respected was how dirty your hands got by sundown. My hands were always dirty. My family owns a local auto shop, Walker's Auto. Been in the family since my granddad opened it back in the 60s, with nothing but a couple tools and a beat-up Ford. He used to call it his third child. The shop outlasted 2 recessions, a couple floods, and more family fights than I can count. And through all of it, I was the one under the hoods. Not because I was the heir or the prodigy or anything, just because I didn't have a choice. Since I was 12, I was in that garage. Saturdays, summers, sick days, didn't matter. My dad didn't believe in rest. I was the designated parts runner, floor sweeper, oil stain scrubber. I learned how to change brake pads before I learned how to shave. And the wild part is, I never complained. I actually loved the work. The smell of grease, the click of a perfect ratchet pull. I was proud of what we built. Except we didn't include me. From the jump, my parents were obsessed with my younger brother, 28 male Dylan. 2 years younger, same last name, completely different lives. I was the one under the car at 8 a.m. Dylan was still in bed, playing Xbox, yelling at his friends through his headset. I once asked my mom why Dylan never had to help. She said, "He's not as responsible as you. You're better at this stuff." Translation: you do all the work because we know you won't fight us on it. They gave him everything. When he flunked out of his first semester of community college, they bought him a used Camaro to boost his confidence. Meanwhile, I was fixing up a '97 Dodge Ram my granddad gave me, a rust bucket, but it was mine. I spent months on that truck. Nights after school, weekends after shifts, YouTube tutorials, calling scrapyards looking for the right parts. That truck was more than a car. It was the first thing I ever built on my own. Grandpa Joe used to walk past while I was working on it and say, "This shop's gonna be yours one day, kid. You've got grit." That stuck with me. Still does. Then Dylan wrecked it. I was 18. Came home from a shift. Truck wasn't in the driveway. I thought maybe it got towed. Maybe I forgot to set the parking brake. Something dumb like that. Nah. Dylan had stolen the keys, took it joyriding to impress some girl, and T-boned a damn telephone pole. Front end crushed. Hood buckled. Radiator cracked open like a soda can. And you know what my parents said? "Tyler, you should have hidden the keys better. You know your brother's impulsive." I swear, if I had any hope left in that moment, it got flattened like that grill. They didn't make him pay for it. Didn't ground him. Didn't even make him apologize. I had to clean the truck up myself, on my day off, and I still remember my dad muttering that I should be more careful next time. Like it was my fault someone else stole my damn car. That's when I knew. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a tool. A wrench that walked and talked. Even after all that, I stayed. I kept working at the shop. After Grandpa passed, I stepped up even more. My dad started slipping, getting forgetful, short-tempered. I handled customer calls, ran invoices, taught myself bookkeeping, so we wouldn't have to pay for some outside firm. Dylan showed up maybe twice a week, and when he did, he just got in the way. One time, he stripped a bolt on a customer's wheel hub because he was texting while torquing it. You know how dangerous that is? Could have killed someone. My dad just brushed it off. He's learning. Meanwhile, I was catching heat if I was 5 minutes late from grabbing lunch. My dog Max was the only one who ever acted like he saw me. He'd sit by my feet in the back office while I processed payroll. A rescue, half lab, half God knows what. Loyal as hell. Every time I started to think maybe I was crazy for staying, I'd look down at him curled up on the mat and think, nah, I'm building something. This will all pay off. It had to, right? Then came Easter. Big family BBQ in our backyard. Tables set up, the whole extended clan there. Uncles, cousins, people I didn't even recognize. We were doing ribs and burgers, everyone acting like one big happy crew. And right there, in front of everyone, my dad stands up and taps his glass like he's toasting a wedding. "I just want to say how proud I am of Dylan," he starts. "And I'm excited to officially announce that he'll be taking over Walker's Auto. We're passing the torch to the next generation." People clapped. I looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something. To look at me and go, "Wait, what about Tyler?" But nope, just fake smiles and forks clinking on plates. I looked at my dad and said, "Are you serious?" He didn't even blink. "You made your choice, son. You chose animals." Nah, I didn't. I chose work. I chose responsibility. I chose to show up. I chose to believe in a promise my grandfather made me every day until the day he died. They just never chose me back. The Monday after that Easter announcement, I still went to the shop. Call it habit, call it stupidity. I'd been doing it for so long, walking away cold turkey didn't even feel possible. My alarm went off at 6:30 like always. Max followed me to the door, and I drove the same route I'd been driving since I was 16. I didn't even get halfway through my first coffee before I was standing in that same oil-stained parking lot. The thing about working in a family business is, you don't just wear one hat. You're the mechanic, the accountant, the janitor, the guy who runs to the parts store because someone forgot to order brake pads. And because it's family, none of that gets you a raise, a bonus, or even a thank you. It's just what you do. That morning, Dad was already in the office with Dylan. They were going over plans for the shop's future. My future apparently didn't make the meeting agenda. Dad didn't even look up when I walked in. Dylan smirked like he'd just been made CEO of Tesla. Ty, grab Bay 3. Transmission job, Dad said without so much as a hello. Yeah, not good morning, not how you doing, not even thanks for still showing up after we just publicly handed your job to someone else. Just a barked order like I was the weekend hire. Fine, whatever. I've always believed work speaks louder than words anyway, so I got to it. The guy's Camry was on the lift within 10 minutes, and I was elbow deep in ATF before Dylan even wandered out to the shop floor. He was wearing one of those spotless shop shirts with his name embroidered on it, sleeves rolled up like he was about to do something useful. Spoiler, he didn't. He strolled around, checking on things, which meant leaning on toolboxes and talking to customers like he'd actually fixed their cars. That's how it was every day after Easter. I did the actual work. Dylan played the part. He'd take pictures of himself pretending to work on an engine and post them online like he was the heartbeat of Walker's Auto. Customers who didn't know better ate it up. Nice to see the next generation stepping up, they'd say. Meanwhile, I was the guy on my knees wrestling with a seized bolt, sweat dripping into my eyes. Jack, my cousin, saw it all. He'd been working part-time at the shop since high school to save for trade school, and he wasn't blind to the favoritism. One slow Tuesday, he leaned over while we were replacing rotors and said, "Man, if I were you, I'd be gone already." I told him I couldn't just bail. This was still Grandpa Joe's shop in my head, the place he built with his bare hands. I wasn't going to be the one who abandoned it, even if it had already abandoned me. Jack shook his head. Loyalty's good, Ty, but not to people who wouldn't return it. I didn't answer, but the words stuck. The favoritism wasn't just at work. It was everywhere. If I came home 5 minutes late for Sunday dinner, Mom would be on me about respecting family time. Dylan could roll in 2 hours late with fast food in his hand and get a laugh, and traffic must have been bad, huh? If I borrowed the shop truck for a supply run and forgot to top off the tank, Dad would act like I'd stolen his retirement fund. Dylan could leave the thing on E for 3 days, and no one said a word. And then there was the smaller betrayal, the one before the big blow-up. Looking back, it was almost a warning shot. A few months after Easter, one of our regulars, Mr. Lewis, brought in his F-150 for brake work. I'd been handling his trucks for years. He trusted me. While I was working on it, Dylan came out and told me Dad wanted me to switch to another job because Dylan needed to get some hands-on time. Translation: let Dylan play with the expensive toy. I didn't love it, but fine. I moved over to the Subaru in Bay 1. Not an hour later, Mr. Lewis is back in the shop, red-faced, saying his truck's brakes were worse than before. Turns out Dylan forgot to torque the caliper bolts properly, and the whole assembly was rattling around. Dad's reaction? He told me it was my fault for not checking Dylan's work before the customer left. Like I'm supposed to be the unpaid quality control guy for someone who's supposedly in charge now. That night, I went home pissed. Max sat by my feet while I scrolled job listings, just to see what was out there. But something in me still couldn't pull the trigger. This was still my place, even if they'd given it to someone else. The work kept piling up. I was running payroll, ordering parts, fixing the actual cars, and training the part-timers. Dylan was doing business development, which as far as I could tell meant hanging out in the office and making calls to his buddies about weekend plans. Dad would gush about Dylan's leadership skills while ignoring the fact that every single repair order had my handwriting on it. Mom wasn't any better. She'd stop by the shop with lunch sometimes. Always Dylan's favorite subs. Never mind. She'd bring him coffee in the mornings, but never asked if I wanted one. Little things, but they add up when it's every damn day. Jack started talking more openly about it. "They're setting you up to get screwed, man," he said one Thursday night when we were closing up. "Dylan's the face, you're the hands. Guess who gets credit when it goes right and who gets blamed when it goes wrong. I knew he was right, but I still showed up the next morning because that's what I did. One Friday afternoon, Dad called a staff meeting. All four of us, me, Dylan, Dad, and Jack, stood in the shop while Dad went over new procedures. Basically, Dylan was getting a raise to reflect his new responsibilities. My pay stayed exactly the same. Jack's too. Jack spoke up, which I'll never forget. So Dylan gets more for standing around, and me and Ty keep doing the same work for the same money? Dad gave him that look, the one that says, "You're about 2 seconds from not having a job." Jack shut up, but the damage was done. I could tell Dylan was loving every second. The next few weeks, I noticed Dylan making bigger and bigger mistakes, ordering the wrong parts, forgetting to bill customers, double booking bays. Every time, Dad found a way to pin it on someone else, usually me. I stopped correcting him. Why waste the breath? Then came the day that finally nudged me closer to the edge. A supplier came by with a past due notice for almost $15,000 worth of parts. I knew we'd paid our invoices on time. I handled the checks myself. Turns out Dylan had directed some of the payments to cover his own marketing expenses, which included a bunch of garbage like a neon shop sign we didn't need and branded hats nobody asked for. The worst part? Dad defended him, said he was investing in the shop's image. That night, Jack texted me, "One day you're going to realize you're the only reason that place is still open." I looked at Max, curled up on the couch, and for the first time I started to believe it. People love to throw out, "Why didn't you just leave?" like it's some magic fix for every crap situation. Easy to say when it's not your blood, your sweat, your damn fingerprints on the tools. I didn't stay because I was waiting for their approval or hoping they'd suddenly treat me fair. I stayed because Walker's Auto was still my shop, even if my name wasn't on the papers. Grandpa built it. I grew up in it. Every car that rolled through those bays had probably been touched by my hands at some point. You don't just walk away from that because someone decides your brother should play boss. And yeah, maybe part of it was ego. I wasn't about to hand Dylan the keys and let him drive the place into a ditch without at least trying to keep the thing alive. If I was going to walk away one day, I wanted it to be on my terms, not because they shoved me out. So I kept showing up. I was there before anyone else most mornings. Max would ride shotgun, I'd unlock the doors, kick on the lights, and start checking the day's appointments before the first wrench was even lifted. It's not that I wanted to impress Dad or Mom. Those days were gone. But customers still trusted me. They'd ask for me by name. Some of these guys had been bringing their cars to the shop since before I was born. If I wasn't there, I knew they'd start going somewhere else. And that would be one more excuse for Dad to say the business was struggling and hand more power to Dylan. Thing is, the more I worked, the more Dylan strutted. He'd walk in at 10 like he owned the place. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, wearing a jacket that looked like he bought it to stand next to a car, not work on one. He wasn't even pretending to put in effort anymore. He'd talk to customers like he was doing them a favor, then duck back into the office to scroll through Instagram. One morning, we had an old lady come in. Mrs. Grant drove a '98 Corolla that should have been in a museum for cars that shouldn't still be running. Sweet woman. But her car was making this horrible grinding sound. Dylan quoted her for new brakes and a new transmission, like he was trying to pay off the shop's debts in one sale. She looked like she was about to cry. I pulled her aside while he was on the phone and told her it was just the brakes. $300 job, tops. Fixed it myself that afternoon. Of course, Dylan found out. And instead of thanking me for not robbing a customer, he stormed out and told me I undermined his authority. I told him authority is earned, not handed out at a family BBQ. He didn't like that answer. Dad called me into the office later and told me to support Dylan's decisions from now on. I just stared at him and said, "Not if it means screwing people over." Then I walked out. I could hear him muttering something behind me, but I didn't care. Jack saw it all. He'd come in after his classes and help with tire changes or oil jobs, and we'd talk in the back when things slowed down. One day, while we were stacking tires, he said, "You're basically keeping this place running by yourself." "Yeah," I said, "and that's why I'm still here. Because if I walk, it's over. And I'm not letting Dylan tell people I quit on the family." "Not yet." Jack nodded. "Just don't let not yet turn into forever." I heard him. But I wasn't done proving my point. I wasn't done making sure customers still got honest work. And deep down, I wasn't done protecting Grandpa's legacy from being turned into some half-assed Instagram brand. But staying didn't mean staying quiet. A couple weeks later, I started keeping detailed logs. Every job I did, every part I ordered, every repair I fixed after Dylan's screw-ups, I wrote it down. Not because I thought Dad would suddenly believe me, but because I knew one day this could matter. If things went south, I wanted records. I also started talking directly to suppliers instead of letting Dylan handle it. That's how I found out he'd been putting orders on credit without telling anyone, running up tabs in the thousands. He'd tell Dad it was his strategic, like debt was just another tool. I knew better. It was lazy and reckless. The first time I brought it up, Dad waved it off. He's learning, he said. Same line I'd been hearing since Dylan stripped that bolt years ago. Same excuse, different mess. But here's the thing. Unlike before, I didn't just take it. I called Dylan out right there in the office. Learning on someone else's dime isn't learning. It's screwing the people who keep bailing you out. He laughed. Actually laughed in my face. You act like this is your shop. I didn't blink. It's more mine than yours, and you know it. Silence. Dad didn't jump in. Mom wasn't there to smooth things over. Dylan just shook his head and walked away. I could feel the tension spike, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to be liked anymore. Customers started noticing the cracks too. A couple regulars asked me quietly if everything was okay. Said Dylan seemed distracted. That work took longer than it used to. I'd just tell them we were busy and change the subject. I wasn't about to start bad-mouthing my family to people outside. But inside, I was done protecting them from the truth. Then came the smaller breaking point, the one that really showed me how far gone things were. A guy named Carson came in with his Mustang. Needed a clutch replacement. Expensive job, but nothing we couldn't handle. I ordered the parts myself and set aside the next day to work on it. I show up that morning, and the parts are gone. Vanished. I look around, check the storage shelves, check the delivery logs. Nothing. Then, I see Dylan in the corner with his phone, grinning. Turns out he sold the clutch kit to one of his buddies off the books for cash. Said it was good networking. Carson's car sat on the lift for 4 extra days, while I reordered everything. And of course, Dad blamed me for not keeping better track of inventory. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Max lying under my feet and told myself, one more. One more big screw-up from him, and I'm done. Not leaving because I'm tired. Not leaving because they want me gone. Leaving because I decide it's time, and I walk out with my head high and my work spotless. And yeah, maybe part of me wanted to stick around long enough to watch Dylan fail on his own. Not out of spite. Okay, maybe a little spite, but mostly because I wanted everyone to see that without me, the place couldn't run. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd been taking for granted. So I kept working, kept logging, kept my head down when it made sense and spoke up when it didn't. And I waited, because every empire that's built on BS eventually collapses. And I wasn't going to miss the day this one finally cracked. If there's one thing I've learned about family businesses, it's that loyalty only works in one direction when favoritism's involved. And at Walker's Auto, that direction was toward Dylan. No matter what he broke, who he ticked off, or how much money he flushed, somehow it always became my problem. The big loss came in mid-September, right when business usually picks up because everyone wants their cars checked before winter. We had a major fleet account with a local construction company. 8 trucks we serviced regularly. They were good customers. Paid on time, no drama, always brought work to us instead of the dealership. That account alone covered almost a third of our monthly revenue. The boss over there, Mike, always called me directly. We had a system. He'd drop off a couple trucks at a time, I'd get them done within a week, and he'd pick them up ready to roll. Smooth, predictable. Until Dylan decided he wanted to streamline things. I came in on Monday and found out Dylan had convinced Mike to bring in all 8 trucks at once so we could do a bulk service and save them money. Which sounds fine on paper, but we didn't have the manpower, the space, or the parts to do 8 trucks in one shot. That's the kind of thing you tell a customer only if you've never actually turned a wrench. I told Dylan straight up, this is a bad idea. We're going to bottleneck the shop, piss off other customers, and you're going to screw the schedule. He waved me off like I was being dramatic. Relax. I've got it under control. Translation. I'm going to dump it on you and disappear. Sure enough, by Wednesday, we had 4 trucks torn apart, 3 more still waiting outside, and customers complaining their cars were stuck for days because the bays were full. To make it worse, Dylan ordered the wrong parts for 2 of the fleet trucks, rotors that didn't fit, and filters for the wrong engine model. I had to reorder everything overnight, which cost extra. Mike came by on Thursday, saw the chaos, and pulled the plug. He told us to put the trucks back together as they were, and he'd take his business elsewhere. Just like that, we lost a $90,000 a year account because Dylan wanted to play big shot manager. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time Dad would see it for what it was. You don't lose an account like that every day, and it was obvious who'd caused it. But when I got called into the office Friday morning, Dad was sitting behind the desk with Dylan leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like a kid who knows the teacher's on his side. Tyler, Dad started. We took a big hit this week. No kidding, I said. And you know exactly why. Dad's jaw tightened. I don't want attitude. The bottom line is we lost a client, and we have to make up the difference somewhere. We can't afford to take that kind of loss without cutting costs. I waited, expecting him to tell Dylan he was going to dock his pay or cut back on whatever junk he was spending shop money on. Instead, Dad leaned forward and said, "We're going to have to hold your salary this month." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. You're telling me Dylan tanks a major account and you're taking my paycheck? You're older. You can handle it, Dad said, like he was talking about lending someone a lawnmower. Dylan's still finding his footing. We can't put that kind of pressure on him right now. I stared at him, then looked at Dylan. You cost us 90 grand a year and you're still getting paid? Dylan shrugged. I'm not the one storming around like a toddler. I didn't even bother looking at him. I wasn't giving him the satisfaction. I just sat back in the chair and let them think they'd won. Inside, I was already working out the math. They thought holding my pay would sting enough to make me swallow it and keep going. They didn't realize it was the exact move I'd been waiting for. I stood up slow, calm. All right, I said, almost like I was agreeing with them. If that's how you want to play it, I'll work with it. Dad's eyebrows pulled together. What's that supposed to mean? You'll see, I told him. Just make sure you remember this day. Then I went straight to my locker, opened it, and pulled out my personal set of tools. Not the cheap, worn-out ones the shop owned, but the custom gear I'd bought myself over the years. The snap-on torque wrenches, the specialty sockets, the diagnostic scanner I'd saved up months for. Every tool that actually made this shop run smoothly, mine, paid for in full. And I wasn't leaving a single one behind. Jack was swapping tires on Bay 2 when he noticed. What's going on? They've been bleeding me dry for years, I said, loading my gear into the truck. Now I'm going to make sure they remember exactly what I brought to this place and what happens when I'm gone. Jack just nodded. He didn't ask questions. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Max jumped into the passenger seat like he'd been waiting for this day too. I drove out without a single look back, but my mind was already lining up the pieces. I had contacts, customers who trusted me, suppliers who knew I paid on time, even a few mechanics in town who hated working for corporate shops and would jump ship for the right opportunity. All I had to do was set the plan in motion, quietly. No shouting matches. No public scene. Just a slow, controlled pull of every thread holding Walker's auto together until it came apart in my hands. If they wanted Dylan to be the face of the shop, then I was going to make sure he was also the face people blamed when everything fell apart. When I drove away from the shop that day with my tools in the back and Max in the passenger seat, they probably thought I'd go home, sulk, and maybe come crawling back once my pride cooled down. That's how they'd trained themselves to think about me. The reliable one, the strong one. The guy who would never really walk away because I cared too much. They didn't realize I'd been paying attention for years, not just to the cars, but to how the shop ran, who we depended on, and who we couldn't afford to piss off. If I was going to walk away, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was taking the one thing they couldn't replace. Trust. And I already knew exactly how to do it. You don't just cut a shop's legs out by bad-mouthing them. That's amateur hour. You do it by making sure everyone who matters has your number before you disappear. First, the customers. Not the random one-time oil change walk-ins. I'm talking the regulars. The people who called me directly instead of the shop line. I had at least 50 of them saved in my phone, all under first names with the car model. Mike, Silverado, Pete, Civic, Ralph, Jeep Wrangler. That's years of work right there. I sent them all the same text. Hey, it's Tyler from Walker's. Not with the shop anymore. If you ever need work done, I'm setting up my own thing soon. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Nothing trashy, no trash talk about Dylan or my parents. Just planting the seed. Then the suppliers. I had great standing with them because I paid on time, every time, even when Dad dragged his feet. I called each rep personally, told them I was stepping away but might have some side work coming. Every single one of them gave me their cell numbers and said to call any time. That told me everything I needed to know. The door was wide open. I wasn't about to open a full shop overnight. Too obvious. Too loud. Instead, I rented a small 2-bay garage from a retired mechanic I knew. Old place, nothing fancy, but it had a lift, decent lighting, and a corner office where Max could sleep on an old dog bed while I worked. The rent was dirt cheap because the guy just wanted someone to keep the building from falling apart. I started slow. Brake jobs, small engine work, tire rotations, the kind of stuff that didn't require a lot of overhead. The regulars I texted? They started coming through one by one. I gave them fair prices, fast turnaround, and zero nonsense. They told their friends. I didn't even need to advertise. And because I was paying attention, I knew exactly which services Walker's Auto hated doing. The tedious ones that didn't make big money but kept customers loyal. I took every single one of those jobs. Wheel bearing replacements? Done. Electrical diagnostics? Sure. A C recharges in the middle of July? Bring 'em in. It didn't take long before I was booking 2 weeks out. Here's the thing about guys like Dylan. You don't have to destroy them. You just have to stop protecting them. Without me there to fix his screw-ups quietly, every single one became public. The Mustang clutch job? Botched. The Jeep lift kit? Installed wrong, chewed through tires in a month? He started getting bad reviews online, the kind customers don't forget. And instead of fixing the problems, he'd argue with them, calling them too picky or blaming the parts. I didn't lift a finger to make that happen. I just stayed busy and kept my head down. But I did keep my ear to the ground. Jack would call me every couple weeks with updates, parts bills going unpaid, more missed deadlines, another good customer walking out. Every time, I'd make a note. I wasn't just building a client list. I was building a case. 3 months in, I got my opening. One of our biggest shared accounts, a landscaping company with 15 trucks, called me directly. Their owner, Luis, had been a Walker's Auto loyalist for 15 years, mostly because of me. He told me Dylan had missed a scheduled maintenance check. 2 trucks broke down in the same week, and when he complained, Dylan said, "That's just how older trucks are." Luis asked if I could take over their fleet service. I said yes, but only if they made a clean break from Walker's Auto. No half-and-half nonsense. He didn't even hesitate. That account alone was worth about $60,000 a year. When word got back to my parents, they called me. Not to apologize. Not to admit they'd been wrong. Dad's voice was cold. "We hear you've been poaching customers." "No," I said. "I've been taking care of people you didn't value. There's a difference." Click. By month 5, my garage was running full tilt. I'd hired one part-timer, a kid from the tech school, and was seriously considering a second lift. The best part? Almost every major account Walker's Auto used to have was either with me or shopping around. Dylan was drowning, and I didn't have to lift a hand to push him under. That's when I pulled the real trigger. Remember those logs I'd been keeping before I left? Every part Dylan ordered wrong. Every redo I had to fix. Every customer I personally saved from walking out. I organized them. Attached invoices, supplier receipts, time cards. It wasn't gossip. It was documented proof that Dylan's leadership had been bleeding the shop for years. Then I sent it all, neatly compiled in a single PDF, to 2 places. The bank that held the shop's business loan. The insurance company that handled their commercial policy. I didn't accuse anyone of fraud. I didn't need to. I just thought they might want to be aware of ongoing management issues that could impact their investment. In business, perception is everything. Suddenly, Walker's Auto wasn't a reliable account. It was a risk. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Jack called me laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. The bank froze their line of credit until they solved management concerns. Insurance wants a full audit. Your mom's losing it. Dylan's blaming the suppliers, Dad's blaming the economy. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just patted Max on the head and went back to work on a Tacoma that needed new struts. Because here's the thing about revenge. The best kind doesn't end in one big scene. It's a slow bleed. You take away what they took for granted, one piece at a time, until all that's left is the mess they made for themselves. After I walked out of Walker's Auto, I didn't go looking for something flashy. I found a small, quiet place on the edge of town. 2 bays, cracked concrete floor, and an office just big enough for a desk, a coffee maker, and Max's bed. Rent was cheap, work was steady, and for the first time in years, every dollar I earned stayed mine. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was all I needed. The thing about slow damage is, people rarely see it coming until it's already too late. By the time Walker's Auto was on its last legs, I didn't have to do anything anymore. The customers were gone. The suppliers didn't trust them, and the bank had them under a microscope. I just kept my head down in my own garage, booked solid for weeks. Then the phone calls started. First, it was Mom. "Tyler, things are rough right now. Maybe you could come by and talk to your father?" Translation: fix the mess Dylan made without admitting he made it. I told her I was busy. Which was true. I had 3 trucks in the bay and a Civic halfway apart. Next, Dad called. No small talk. "Tyler, we're losing customers because you took them. Not because Dylan can't do the job, not because the shop's been mismanaged for years. just straight up blaming me like I'd robbed them at gunpoint. I didn't bother arguing. I just said, I didn't take them. I kept them. You're the reason they left. Then I hung up. A week later, Jack sent me a text. You might want to swing by the shop today, just for the view? I didn't want to admit I was curious, but I drove by anyway. The lot was half empty. No line of cars waiting, no customers in the lobby. One of the big bay doors was stuck halfway open, and there were weeds growing through the cracks in the lot. Weeds in September. It looked like a place that had been abandoned for months, not a business trying to stay alive. The entitled parade. It all came to a head 2 days later. I was closing up my shop for the night when I heard Max barking. Pulled up the front blinds and saw them, Mom, Dad, and Dylan, standing in my parking lot like they were here for some kind of intervention. Mom was holding a folder. Dad had his hands jammed into his jacket pockets, and Dylan was leaning on a car like he owned the place. I stepped outside and kept the door mostly shut so Max wouldn't bolt. Dad started talking before I was even halfway down the steps. We're in trouble, Tyler. The bank's breathing down our necks, and without your help, Walker's Auto is going to close. I didn't say anything, just crossed my arms and waited. Mom stepped forward, her voice all soft, like she was negotiating with a stubborn kid. Honey, this is still your family's legacy. You can't just watch it disappear. We need you back at the shop, just for a little while, until we get things stable again. Then Dylan piped up, smirking. Yeah, and when you come back, we can figure out a way to make it work without all the drama. That one almost made me laugh. This guy ran the place into the ground and was still acting like I'd been the problem. The offer, I finally asked, what exactly are you asking for? Dad looked at Mom, then back at me. We need you to bring your customers back, and we need you to put in at least 60 hours a week for the next few months. No pay until the shop's back in the black. Then we'll talk about what's fair. I just stared at him. They were standing in front of my own successful business, surrounded by cars people trusted me to work on, and telling me to abandon it so I could bail out the same people who'd shoved me out and stolen my paycheck. That's your big plan? I said. I drop everything I built so Dylan can keep playing boss? Mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. This isn't about Dylan. It's about family. I shook my head. No, this has always been about Dylan. And you made your choice a long time ago. The final nail. Dylan rolled his eyes. You act like you're some genius who built everything from scratch. You just fix cars, Tyler. Anybody can do that. I took a step toward him, not angry, just done. If anybody could do it, the shop wouldn't be collapsing right now. That shut him up. I looked at Dad. You remember the day you told me I wasn't getting paid to make up for losses? That was the day I started making sure I'd never need you again. And I don't. You wanted Dylan to carry the legacy, so let him carry it. Mom started to say something else, but I cut her off. I'm not coming back. I'm not loaning you money. And I'm not giving you my customers. You've got exactly what you asked for. Live with it. I turned and walked back into my shop, locked the door. Max sat at my feet, wagging his tail like it was over. And it was. By the end of the month, Walker's Auto was closed for renovations. 2 months later, the sign was gone, replaced by a for lease banner. People in town started bringing me stories about how it's a shame the family shop went under. I never corrected them. I just said, yeah, it is, and got back to work. Because that's the thing. I didn't destroy Walker's Auto. I just stopped saving it. When Walker's Auto shut down, it didn't just hit the business. It hit their whole lives. The bank took their house after they defaulted on the business loan. They ended up crammed into a rundown rental where the plumbing barely worked. Dad was doing odd jobs out of the back of a rusty pickup. Mom was working as a cashier, and Dylan was sitting at home, looking for opportunities on his phone all day. Word about why the shop went under spread fast. No one wanted to hire Dylan. Not even the chain shops desperate for cheap labor. Customers they used to brag about having were now in my bays, handing me keys and saying, "We wish we'd come to you sooner." I didn't gloat. I just did the work. It was a rainy Thursday when they showed up at my shop. All three of them, standing in the lot like they owned the place. I stepped outside, arms crossed. Dad went first. "Tyler, we need you back. We can get the shop going again if you bring your customers. We'll even talk about pay once things are steady." Mom added, "This is your family. You can't just turn your back on us." Dylan stood there smirking, like it was a done deal. You know you can't run from family forever. I looked at them, then at the shop behind me. My shop, my customers, my rules. "You had your chance," I said. "You made your choice. Now live with it." I turned and went back inside, locking the door. Max trotted over and laid at my feet. Outside, I could hear them still talking, but their voices faded. At 15, my parents dumped me at my grandparents' farm so their golden daughter could shine. Years later, after I built a life they never expected, they returned demanding support, only to learn my wedding didn't include a single seat for them. Hey, Reddit. My family made it clear who the favorite was, and it definitely wasn't me. So I packed up whatever dignity I had left, rebuilt my entire life from the ground up, and stopped waiting for any of them to act like actual parents. Before I get into all that, here's how everything started. I'm Ryan Harper, 30 now, married, settled, and living a life I built with my own hands. But back then, I was the family screw-up. My little sister Maddie Harper, was the perfect one. My parents, Deb and Gary, acted like she carried the whole family name on her shoulders, and I was just around to make everything harder. Before things fell apart, the person I spent most of my time with wasn't even family. It was Tyler Brooks. He was basically my brother. We'd game until 2 in the morning, ride our bikes all over the neighborhood, try random sports because we were bored, and make stupid plans about renting some tiny apartment one day and fixing it up ourselves. It was the kind of friendship where you just assume the other guy is always going to be around. Then he wasn't. The accident took Tyler and his parents on the same day. There wasn't even a real goodbye. Just phone calls, a couple adults talking in hushed voices, and me standing there trying to convince myself someone misunderstood something. I don't think 15-year-old me had the mental room to accept that someone who'd been over every weekend for years just vanished. After that, everything in my house felt heavier, like the walls got closer. A few days later, my parents insisted on a family dinner to get things back to normal. They said it like normal was even possible. We all sat down. I barely touched my food. My head wasn't in the room. I could still see Tyler's bike leaning against my garage from the last time he came over. While I was sitting there trying not to fall apart, Deb launched into her usual routine about Maddie's accomplishments. "She's just doing so amazing," she said, hand on her chest like she was announcing a miracle. "Her teachers can't stop talking about her potential." Gary nodded along like he was her manager. "She's setting an example. That's what discipline looks like." Then he looked right at me. "Ryan, don't drag the mood down tonight." Maddie leaned back in her chair, smiling like she was on a stage. "Maybe you could try harder too," she said, acting innocent. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She waited for a reaction. I didn't give her one. I tried talking once. Just one sentence about how weird everything felt without Tyler. Deb cut me off immediately. "Ryan, please, we're trying to have a positive dinner." Gary added, "There's a time and place for your emotions." Apparently, that time and place never existed in that house. I felt invisible. Like the only person who noticed Tyler was gone was me. And even that made me an inconvenience. School after that felt pointless. Every hallway had some memory attached. His empty chair in class made me sick. I stopped caring about homework, about group projects, about showing up. I didn't want to talk to anyone, especially teachers who felt obligated to ask if I was managing okay. I wasn't. I wasn't even close. I started hanging around people who didn't expect anything from me. Guys who didn't ask where I was going after school or why I didn't want to go home. We weren't doing anything impressive. Mostly stupid, reckless stuff because it felt better than sitting still long enough to think. Deb responded by going full martyr. "You're destroying this family," she'd say, hands on her forehead like she was fainting. "Do you know what you're putting us through?" Gary gave speeches that sounded like he practiced them in the mirror. "You're choosing the wrong path. A man takes responsibility." He always timed these speeches for when I was already upset, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to twist the knife. And Maddie? She used every mistake I made as fuel. "I don't get how we're related," she said one morning before school. That sentence got her extra praise from Deb. At least one of my kids cares about her future. Everything I did was either wrong or proof that Maddie was better. The final blow happened when me and a couple of the guys were messing around in a parking lot after dark. We were underage and acting stupid. Someone called the cops. When the patrol car rolled up, I knew I was screwed before they even spoke. They took us in. Not a real arrest, just holding us until parents arrived. But that was enough. Deb walked in with tears already flowing. "Ryan, how could you do this to us?" Gary stood stiff, arms crossed, giving me the look of someone about to deliver a closing argument. Maddie wasn't even there, but she made sure everyone knew later how embarrassing it was for her. The ride home felt like hours. Deb switched between crying and blaming me. Gary lectured nonstop. "This is what happens when you refuse to listen," he said, as if I'd ever been given space to say anything at all. The next morning, before I even sat up in bed, they told me I was leaving. No discussion. No, "How are you actually doing?" Nothing. Just, You're going to live with your grandparents until you can get yourself together. Maddie stood behind them with her arms crossed like she was watching the ending of a show she enjoyed. When I got in the car with my bag, I didn't feel scared. I felt erased, like they'd finally admitted what they'd been hinting at for years. Maddie mattered. I didn't. That was the moment things truly cracked. Not when Tyler died, not when school fell apart. Right there, in that driveway, when my own parents made it clear I wasn't worth keeping around. And my parents dropped me off at my grandparents' place on a cold morning. I was 15, sitting in the back seat with one backpack and the last scraps of my old life. We turned down the long dirt driveway, and I expected judgment waiting for me. Another round of speeches or disappointed stares. Instead, Grandpa walked out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, calm as ever. Grandma came out from the porch, already smiling like I was someone she'd been missing, not the kid my parents had just kicked out. Grandpa walked right up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You're home now." No anger, no questions. Grandma hugged me. "Come inside, sweetheart. You look worn out." Behind me, Deb barely stepped out of the car. She stood with her hand on the door like she might faint. Gary looked proud of himself, like he'd solved a problem. "Don't make them regret this," he said. That was his goodbye. Nobody answered him. Grandma didn't even look at them. They drove off, dust rising behind the car until it disappeared. That evening, I met Uncle Scott, Gary's brother. Technically, I'd met him when I was a little kid, but the memories were fuzzy. Just a couple birthday parties and one cookout I barely remembered. He'd moved out here long ago to help Grandpa and Grandma run the farm. My parents never talked about him much, so seeing him again felt like meeting someone new. He walked in from the far side of the yard, carrying 2 heavy feed bags. He wasn't loud or dramatic, just steady. He set the bags down, nodded at me, and said, "You're Ryan, right? You were tiny the last time I saw you." I nodded, and he held out his hand. "I'm Scott, your uncle." Then he said the 3 things that set the tone for everything that came after. "You're safe here. You gotta rebuild yourself. I'm not giving up on you, but you can't wreck this house." He didn't raise his voice or stare me down, just laid it all out like simple instructions. The first few weeks were awkward. Not because of anything they did, because I didn't know how to react to adults who didn't yell or guilt trip me. I waited for a trap that never came. Grandpa woke up early and handled chores like it was nothing. Scott worked right beside him. Grandma kept the house running steadily, always checking if I'd eaten or slept, but never prying. When I messed up something, like latching a gate wrong or dropping wood, Scott didn't sigh or tilt his head like he was disappointed. He'd just fix it, show me fast, and move on. No speeches, no guilt, just correction and routine. Little by little, the house stopped feeling temporary. I did chores in the morning, helped with the animals, and kept up with school. Nobody compared me to Maddie. Nobody talked to me like I was a burden. I didn't trust it at first, but the steadiness worked on me in ways I didn't notice right away. By the time I turned 17, life at the farm had settled into something normal. I finished high school through the local district, did chores before and after classes, and actually passed everything. Not perfectly, but enough to get through without anyone yelling about it. Scott was the one who brought up college. "Community college is 20 minutes away," he said. "You're old enough. You should go. No point sitting around once you're done with school." He didn't say it like a demand, just a direction. Grandpa agreed. Grandma packed me lunch every day before classes started. It was the first time I made a next step without feeling pushed into it or compared to anyone. Community college wasn't big. Couple buildings, cheap cafeteria, quiet hallways. But it felt like a clean start. That's where I met Hope. I noticed her during our first semester, in a crowded lecture room where half the class was half asleep. She took actual notes, asked questions, and didn't seem bothered by anything around her. After class, she held the door open for me and said, "You're in my section, right?" In this plain, friendly tone that didn't make anything awkward. We kept ending up in the same group work, walking out of the same hallways, sharing the same breaks. We didn't jump into dating or anything. It started slow. Small jokes, casual conversations, studying at the same table. No pressure, no weirdness. She talked to me like I wasn't a screw-up or a charity project, just another student. Back at the farm, life kept moving. Grandpa showed me new chores every season. Grandma treated me like I'd always belonged there. Scott stayed steady. Never loud, never dramatic, just there every day, teaching me things without making it feel like a lesson. Those 2 years changed everything. And I didn't fully see it yet, but the farm, Scott, and even the quiet routine had already done more for me than my parents ever tried to. After a few months, I learned how to lift with my legs instead of my back, how to tie knots that didn't fall apart, how to fix a fence panel without breaking the next one over. The weather didn't scare me anymore. I started finishing chores without Scott having to redo them behind me. That felt new, being trusted to not screw everything up. College ran alongside all that. Classes in the morning, farm work in the afternoon, and hope was becoming a regular part of my days. We'd walk to our cars together, compare how awful our professors were, or sit in the library finishing assignments. She didn't ask about my past. She didn't act like she needed to figure me out. She just liked being around me, and that was enough. Life was starting to feel balanced until Gary showed up. One afternoon, I came inside for water and found him standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed like he owned the place. Grandma stayed by the stove, not looking at him, and Grandpa sat at the table with that expression he used when he was minutes from losing patience. Gary looked me up and down. "Good to see you're doing better," he said, like he deserved credit for it. He turned to Grandpa. "I think it's important he understands that this improvement doesn't erase what happened. He needs to earn forgiveness." He said it like he was giving a sermon. He didn't ask how I was doing or what I'd been working on. He just walked in and went straight to the moral lessons. Then, he tried telling Grandpa and Grandma how to handle me. He needs structure, clear rules, consistent discipline. You can't just let him run around. That's how we got here. Grandpa finally put his mug down. "You don't get to tell us how to handle anything," he said. "You dropped him off and drove away. We'll raise him how we see fit." Gary blinked like someone had slapped him. "I'm only saying this for his good," he tried again, slipping into his usual devil's advocate tone. "Somebody needs to hold him accountable." Scott walked into the kitchen right then, and Gary went quiet for a moment. "Well, well, well, look who decided to show up," Scott said, looking at Gary. "Hey," Gary replied. That instantly shifted the room. Gary's jaw tightened. "Fine, do it your way." He glanced at me like I disappointed him by not backing him up. Then he walked out without saying goodbye. I didn't chase after him. I didn't say a word. A few days later, Deb called Grandma. I was walking past the hallway when I heard the start of it. "I miss my boy," she said, her voice soft and shaky. "I think about him every day." It almost sounded real, until Grandma gently suggested she talk to me directly. Deb snapped instantly. "You don't understand what he put us through," she said. "We sacrificed everything, and Maddie suffered more than anyone. You can't imagine how hard it was." Her tone changed so fast it barely made sense. Grandma didn't argue. She just said, "I need to finish dinner," and hung up. I heard enough to know it hadn't changed at all. Deb still made everything about her. Gary still pretended he knew what was best from a distance. And Maddie was still their center of gravity. Instead of bothering me the way it used to, it made something clearer. I wasn't going back there. I didn't want to. Whatever family role I used to hold had been replaced years ago, and trying to get it back didn't make sense anymore. On the farm, I was useful. In school, I was passing. With Scott and Grandpa, I was learning. With Grandma, I was safe. And with Hope, I was starting to feel like someone who had potential, not someone who needed fixing. The more my parents tried to reach into my life with guilt or lectures, the more it pushed me toward the people who stayed consistent. I didn't say any of this out loud, not then, but I felt it. Every day I got up, did my work, and kept putting distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming. And Hope kept showing up. Not dramatic, not trying to fix my problems, just steady. The same way the farm was steady. The same way Scott was steady. For the first time in years, my life wasn't falling apart. It was finally taking shape. By the time winter rolled around, things continued the same. I hadn't heard much from my parents, which made life quieter. But Maddie, even from a distance, still found ways to get under my skin. It started with a message from one of my cousins. Nothing dramatic, just a casual text asking how things were going. Then, out of nowhere, she added, "Maddie's been talking again. Thought you should know before it spreads more." I asked what she meant. The reply came fast. "Maddie says you're freeloading out there, that Grandpa and Grandma are wasting money on you. She keeps saying she's the one carrying the family name now." I sat on the edge of my bed reading it twice. It wasn't surprising that Maddie was still obsessed with attention, but hearing she was dragging my grandparents into it made my jaw clench. They'd done more for me in 2 years than my parents had in 5, and she was trying to twist it into some kind of burden. I showed the message to Uncle Scott. He didn't react much, just sighed and said, "She doesn't know how this house works." Grandpa overheard and grunted something under his breath I didn't catch, but the look he gave Scott said he already suspected something like this was going around. A few days later, the rumor reached the rest of the extended family. It built fast. Someone repeated Maddie's comments at a relative's house, and suddenly people were questioning whether Grandpa and Grandma were enabling me. The more it spread, the worse it sounded. At one point, someone even asked Grandma if she was tired of raising other people's mistakes. Grandma didn't tell me that. My cousin did. By the time the holiday gathering came around, the situation was already tense. I didn't go. The plan was to stay home, finish chores, and avoid dealing with people who barely said 2 words to me until they had an opinion to offer. But Grandpa and Grandma went, and from what I heard later, the whole thing fell apart within an hour. A relative, someone on my dad's side, made a passive comment about kids who don't appreciate what they're given. Grandma ignored it. Then another person said something about how Maddie is doing amazing and representing the Harper name well, followed by a snide, "Shame not everyone does." That was when Grandpa stepped in. Scott told me how it unfolded later. Grandpa put his fork down, looked across the table, and said, "You don't get to talk about my grandson like that when you haven't lifted a finger for him." It wasn't loud, but it was final. The room went silent. Someone tried to defend Maddie, saying she was just concerned, but Grandpa cut them off. "She's stirring trouble, and you're allowing it. Ryan works hard. He earns his keep. If you can't respect him, then you don't respect us either." Afterward, he told Scott that certain people wouldn't be welcome at the farm for a long while. When Grandma got home, she acted like nothing happened, but I could tell she was still upset. She made dinner as usual and asked me about school, never mentioning the argument. She didn't have to. I heard enough from cousins to understand how heated it got. Later that night, Hope came by to drop off a book she'd borrowed from me. She could tell something was off. I didn't plan to talk about it, but she stayed in the doorway and asked, "Rough day?" I nodded. "Family stuff." She didn't ask for details. She didn't try to give advice. She just stepped closer, squeezed my arm gently, and said, "You're doing your best. That counts for something." That night, lying in bed, it finally clicked for me. I had always thought Maddie was just spoiled, annoying, and glued to attention. But this wasn't normal sibling rivalry. This wasn't just favoritism, it was malicious. She wasn't just favored. She was toxic. She wasn't satisfied being the golden child. She needed me to stay the disappointment, so she could keep shining. She wanted a target. And I was done being it. I finished community college at 19. No ceremony, no family cheering, no phone call from Deb or Gary. Grandma hugged me when I brought home the certificate. Grandpa shook my hand once and said, "Good, now keep going." Uncle Scott grilled burgers that night and didn't say much, but I could tell he was proud. That was enough. I found a telemarketing job a couple months later. It wasn't glamorous, but I was quick with people and learned fast. At first, I just called lists and followed scripts. But after a few months, my supervisor started giving me tougher calls. Then she started letting me handle training for new hires. 2 years in, I got promoted to team lead. A year after that, I became a sales manager. The job had weird hours, but it paid steady. I stayed living with Grandpa, Grandma, and Scott because it made sense. Rent wasn't even part of the conversation. Grandpa would have laughed if I tried offering any. So instead, I covered bills where I could, bought groceries, paid for repairs when something broke, and still helped with the farm whenever I got home early enough. Life felt balanced. Work, farm, nights with Hope, all in the same rhythm. Then one spring, right when the farm got busiest, everything hit at once. Scott hurt his back carrying a feed bag wrong. I heard him drop it and curse under his breath, and when I got to him, he was hunched over, holding the side of his waist like someone had stabbed him. He tried to walk it off, but Grandpa told him to sit down before he made it worse. Grandma brought ice packs. The doctor said it was a back strain. Scott needed rest. Real rest. Problem was, spring didn't care. Chores doubled. Animals needed feeding before sunrise. Fences needed patching after storms. Bills didn't stop. And my job wasn't slowing down either. Our department was behind that month, and I was responsible for getting numbers back up. I started waking up 2 hours earlier than usual to get ahead of the farm tasks. I'd run around hauling feed, collecting eggs, checking the barn, and dragging equipment across the yard, then rush inside, grab a quick shower, sit down with my laptop, and start my shift. I'd work through lunch, finish calls, close the laptop, and head right back outside. By the first week, I felt like someone had pulled the batteries out of my body. My chest hurt from running around, my hands shook from exhaustion, and I started falling asleep sitting up at the kitchen table. Grandma told me to slow down, and Grandpa insisted they could manage, even though I saw his joints lock every time he bent. Scott apologized constantly, frustrated he couldn't help, but none of them told me to stop. They knew the work had to be done. One night after a storm, I was out in the mud with a flashlight fixing a broken fence, rain dripping off my hair, fingers numb around the wire. Every muscle screamed, but I kept going. Not because I wanted to, but because this house saved me, and I wasn't letting it fall apart. Hope saw pieces of it. She brought food, helped Grandma, and never pushed me to slow down. She just fit into the rhythm of the place. Halfway through the season, a cousin sent me a voice memo from a family gathering. Someone asked Gary how I was doing, and he sighed like he'd carried the world on his back. Sending him to Mom and Dad's saved his life, he said. We did what good parents do. Hearing him take credit for abandoning me didn't make me sad. It made something harden. Later, when Hope found me fixing a latch, she saw it on my face. She didn't pry. She just held the gate steady and said, "You're doing good work. They're lucky to have you." For the first time in weeks, some of the pressure eased. Scott's back healed. Grandpa said he was proud. Grandma made my favorite dinner, and Hope stayed steady through it all. That spring nearly broke me. But by the end, I understood something important. My life wasn't built on running from who I used to be. It was built on showing up for the people who showed up for me. By the time I was 24, things on the farm were running steady again. Scott's back had healed. Grandma was still keeping the house moving like a well-oiled machine, and Grandpa had started hinting that I should be thinking about my next step. Not moving out, just building a future that wasn't stuck in limbo. One morning, Grandpa slid a folded paper across the table. "Auction coming up," he said. "Small plot, cheap if the right person bids." Scott leaned over my shoulder to look. "Good land," he said. "Not perfect, but you could build something." I knew what they were trying to say without saying it. It was time for me to have something of my own. I spent the next week doing nothing but running numbers. Everything I'd saved from my telemarketing job wasn't much, but it was enough to take a shot. If I won the land, I'd have nothing left in the bank, but I'd have a start. A place that was mine. A real foundation. Grandpa and Scott went with me the day of the auction. Hope came too, standing close, but not inserting herself. She knew how important this was. The crowd wasn't big. A few older farmers, a couple investors, and the owner of the property, a man named Carson. He shook hands with people, looked everyone over like he already had opinions. When the bidding started, I raised my card with full confidence. I knew I'd have to put everything I had into it, but I didn't hesitate. I raised my card again and again until the auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. Hope squeezed my hand so hard I almost forgot to breathe. Walking out of that building with the paperwork felt unreal. Not because I was lucky, but because Grandpa and Scott had backed me without blinking. They believed me when my own parents tried to sabotage it. A few days later, I walked the land for the first time. It wasn't much. Just a few acres of uneven ground, an old fence line, and a long stretch of grass. But it was mine. I spent nights sketching plans for a small house. Nothing fancy. Just enough space to live in without feeling cramped. I didn't even get a week to settle into it before Maddie showed up. I was marking out where a future driveway might go, when a loud car came bouncing down the dirt path. 3 girls piled out, all dressed like they were here for a photo shoot. Maddie led the way, sunglasses on, phone already recording. "This place is perfect," she said, spinning in a circle like she owned it. "We're going to get such good pictures." I stepped in front of her. "You need to leave." She blinked like she hadn't heard right. "Relax. It's just photos." "You don't even have a house here yet." "It doesn't matter. This isn't your party spot," she scoffed. "Wow. You're really going to ruin this? You should be grateful anyone even wants to come out here." Her friends laughed. I didn't. "I don't care," I said again. "Get off my land." She stormed back to her car, fake crying loud enough to be heard from the road. By the time she got home, she'd already spun the story. Deb and Gary started blowing up Grandma's phone, acting like I'd attacked Maddie for no reason. A few days later, Gary showed up to check on his parents. He cornered me near the barn. "You need to be more understanding," he said. "She's young. She didn't mean anything by it." "She showed up without permission," I said. "That's it." Gary shook his head. "You can't keep pushing people away. And that land, are you sure you can handle it? Don't embarrass yourself." Before I could respond, Scott stepped out of the barn. "You don't get to dump him here and then act like you raised him," he said. "He's doing more for this family than you ever did." Gary tried his devil's advocate tone. "I'm only trying to help." "No," Scott said. "You're not." Gary didn't stay much longer. That evening, I drove Hope to the land. The sun was low, the sky orange. I didn't have speeches planned. I didn't have a ring from some fancy store. I had her hand in mine and the place where our future might be. I proposed. She said yes. When we told Grandpa, Grandma, and Scott, all 3 reacted the way real families should. Grandma hugged Hope first. Grandpa nodded once like he'd been expecting it. Scott clapped me on the back hard enough to make me stumble. Standing on that land later that night, I made a quiet decision. My future was here, with the people who stayed, with hope, with the life I was building brick by brick, not with the ones who tried to tear it down. Building the house took every spare hour I had. I'd finish my shift for the telemarketing job, close the laptop, and drive straight to the land. Some days I spent hours leveling ground or hauling supplies. Other days I was measuring boards under a flashlight because the sun had already gone down. It was stressful, tiring, and a lot rougher than I expected, but it never felt pointless. Hope came whenever she could, handing me tools, marking boards, bringing food, acting like she'd been part of this life forever. The farm stayed steady during that time until one morning when everything stopped. I woke up to Grandma yelling for us. Grandpa was slumped over at the kitchen table, gripping his chest. He wasn't passed out, but he looked pale and confused. Scott reacted instantly, helping him stand while I grabbed the truck keys. We got him into the passenger seat. Grandma climbed in the back, and Scott stayed behind to call the clinic ahead of us. The drive felt longer than it was. Grandpa didn't say much, just held his chest and took slow breaths. At the clinic, they rushed him inside for tests. The doctor came out later and told us it wasn't a heart attack, but it was close enough to be a warning. Grandpa needed rest. Real rest. No heavy lifting, no long hours, no "I'll be fine" speeches. We brought him home with new medication and instructions. He hated the attention, but followed orders because Grandma stared him down until he agreed. News travels fast in families that pretend they're close. By that afternoon, Grandma's phone started buzzing nonstop. The first call she put on speaker was from Deb. The second she heard Grandma's voice, Deb burst into loud, dramatic crying. "I can't believe this is happening to us," she sobbed. This is horrible." Grandma tried saying Grandpa was okay, but Deb didn't listen. She kept going, talking about how she was stressed, how she couldn't handle bad news, how hard this was for her. Not once did she ask how Grandpa actually felt. Not once did she ask if we needed help. Then Gary got on the call. "Well," he said in his calm, fake voice, "this is why family has to stay united. Someone needs to step up and keep things organized." He didn't ask me how I was doing, or Scott, or Grandma. He acted like he was the one holding everything together, even though he hadn't been part of the farm for a single day. I stood in the doorway listening, feeling that old familiar coldness settle back in. Grandma ended the call before Deb's crying got louder. The next day, Maddie showed up in a shiny car with tinted windows. She jumped out wearing clothes that looked borrowed from a fashion blog, holding her phone like she was filming a reality show. "Oh my God," she said loudly, hugging Grandma dramatically. I rushed over the second I heard. She didn't ask about Grandpa until after she'd updated her status online. Then she turned to me. "Ryan, don't stress Grandma today, okay? She doesn't need your moods." She walked into the house like it was hers, organizing things nobody asked her to touch, telling Grandma which chores she shouldn't worry about anymore, even though she didn't actually do any of them. Later, she walked out to the barn and pointed at Grandpa's truck. "I need this," she said. "My friend wants to shoot some pictures at a rustic location. The truck is perfect." "No," I said. "Grandpa's not well. We need the truck here." She rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. It's just for a couple hours." "No," I repeated. She reached for the keys on the hook. I stepped in front of her. She immediately flipped into victim mode, raising her voice so Grandma could hear inside. "Wow," she said louder. "You're still the same angry kid. I'm just trying to help, and you're attacking me." Grandma came to the door. "Maddie, put the keys down," she said sternly. Maddie looked stunned that Grandma wasn't on her side. She dropped the keys and stormed out, muttering about how toxic I was. 20 minutes later, Deb called Grandma. She started soft, "I just want peace in this family." Then Gary, "After everything we went through raising Ryan, you're letting him disrespect Maddie?" They were blaming me while pretending to be balanced. Scott finally took the phone. "You don't get to talk about respect," he said. "Not after disappearing when things were hard. Don't call here to stir problems." He hung up before Gary could respond. 3 days later, Deb and Gary showed up in person. They didn't ask how Grandpa was doing. Gary started with, "We're just checking to make sure things are handled correctly." Deb crossed her arms, glaring at me like I was the problem. Maddie climbed out behind them, ready to start something. "You need to calm down around people," she said to me. "Your energy is always so negative." Gary nodded. "Your uncle said you've been stressed. You can't take that out on your sister." He talked like he was the reasonable one in the room. Deb stepped forward. "You should apologize to your sister. She just wanted to borrow a truck." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I didn't bother arguing. "This is Grandpa and Grandma's house," I said. If you're here to help them, help. If you're here for drama, leave. I'm not your project anymore. They all started talking at once, Deb crying, Gary moralizing, Maddie complaining. But I didn't move. I didn't back up. Scott walked out and stood beside me, silent but solid. That was enough. They left, furious. A few months later, the house was maybe halfway done, but it felt right. Hope and I planned a simple ceremony on the farm. Nothing big, just friends, neighbors, and the people who actually mattered. Grandpa walked her down the aisle because her own father lived out of state. Grandma did the flowers. Scott helped set up everything from chairs to lights. We didn't invite Deb, Gary, or Maddie. Not out of revenge, out of peace. They didn't earn a place in that moment. Word spread fast anyway. Deb melted down to relatives, telling everyone she was robbed of her son's wedding. Gary acted like he was some wise parent who'd been betrayed. Maddie tried turning the whole thing into gossip, posting online about fake family loyalty. Grandpa shut it all down. Anyone who tried bringing it up got a quick, they weren't invited for good reason, and that was the end of that. The ceremony was small, warm, and real. Hope looked happy in a way that made everything worth it. When we walked back up the aisle, Grandma wiped her eyes, Grandpa smiled more than I'd seen in years, and Scott clapped me on the back so hard I nearly tripped. That night, Hope and I drove out to our half-built house. The frame was up, the foundation was solid, and the field behind it caught the last bit of sunset. We stood there, tired but steady, knowing exactly who our family actually was. The ones who showed up, stayed, and helped build something real. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. My twin brother appeared at my door, covered in bruises. His wife's brothers had been beating him for a year. So we switched places, and I made sure they'd never forget it. All right, Reddit. My identical twin brother showed up at my apartment last year looking like he'd been through a war zone. Turns out his wife's brothers had been using him as a punching bag for over 12 months. He asked me to switch places with him so he could escape and heal. I agreed, and spent 7 weeks living his nightmare while documenting everything. Then I invited those guys to dinner and watched their world burn. Here's how it went down. I'm Nathan, 32 male, work as a civil engineer for a construction firm in Seattle. Decent career, own my condo, drive a reliable truck, live a pretty straightforward life. My twin brother Ethan and I are identical. Same height, same build, same facial features down to the small scar above our left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. Growing up, we used to mess with people constantly, switching classes in high school, pretending to be each other at family gatherings. Our parents could tell us apart, but most other people struggled unless they knew us really well. We stayed close through college and into adulthood, even though our paths diverged professionally. Ethan went into marketing, met his wife Kristen at a company event about 5 years ago, got married after a whirlwind romance, had a daughter named Sophie who just turned 4. I was his best man at the wedding, watched him beam with happiness as he said his vows. He seemed genuinely content with his life. Good job, beautiful family, nice house in the suburbs. That's why I was completely unprepared for what happened that Tuesday evening in March. I was sitting at my kitchen table, halfway through reviewing blueprints for a commercial project, when I heard the knock. It wasn't the confident rap of a friend dropping by or the quick tap of a delivery driver. This knock was hesitant, almost apologetic, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to be there. I remember setting down my coffee mug and walking to the door with this vague sense of unease already settling in my chest. When I opened that door, I didn't immediately recognize the person standing there. Not because he looked different from me, we're identical twins, mirrors of each other in almost every physical way, but because the person in front of me seemed diminished somehow, like someone had taken my confident, successful brother and hollowed him out from the inside. His shoulders were hunched forward, his head bowed. When he finally looked up at me, I saw the bruises. These weren't the kind you get from tripping over furniture or bumping into a cabinet door. They were deliberate, methodical. A dark purple bloom spread across his left cheekbone, edges fading into sickly yellow-green. His bottom lip was split, crusted with dried blood that hadn't been properly cleaned. When he shifted his weight, I noticed how he winced, how he held his ribs like they might crack open if he moved too quickly. His knuckles were raw, scraped clean of skin in places. There was a haunted look in his eyes that I'd never seen before, not even when we were kids, and things were genuinely hard after Mom died. This was different. This was the look of someone who'd been systematically broken down over an extended period. I stepped back without thinking, pulling the door wider. Ethan walked past me into the apartment like a ghost drifting through a life he no longer belonged to. I closed the door behind him, locked it, and turned to face him. He stood in the middle of my living room, arms wrapped around himself, staring at the floor. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, until I finally managed to say his name. He flinched at the sound of it. That small reaction, so unlike the confident, charismatic brother I'd known all my life, sent a cold spike of fear straight through me. What happened? My voice came out rougher than I intended, sharp with worry and the beginnings of anger. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sank down onto the edge of my couch, moving carefully like every part of him hurt. He rested his elbows on his knees and let his head hang forward, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, broken and raw in a way that made my chest ache. "It's Kristen's brothers," he said simply. "Blake and Craig." My stomach dropped. I knew them vaguely. Loud, overbearing guys who dominated every family gathering, who spoke over everyone and acted like they owned whatever space they occupied. Blake was the older one, probably 35, worked in construction management. Craig was younger, around 30, did something in sales. Both of them had that aggressive confidence that comes from never being seriously challenged. I'd always thought they were just the kind of people you tolerate because you have to, not because you want to. But this was something else entirely. Over the next 2 hours, Ethan told me everything. The story came out in fragments, his voice cracking, his hands shaking as he described what had been happening for the past year. It started small, he explained. A shove here, a harsh word there, always framed as rough play between guys, always dismissed as brotherly teasing. They mocked him at family dinners, belittled his career in marketing, called him soft, weak, not man enough for their sister. Kristen would laugh along sometimes, or worse, say nothing at all. Just look away while they tore him down piece by piece. Ethan thought he could endure it. He figured if he kept his head down, stayed quiet, proved himself somehow, they'd eventually leave him alone. But it got worse. They started coming to the house unannounced, barging in like they owned the place, taking food from the fridge, changing channels on the TV, making it clear that Ethan had no say in his own home. They'd watch him when Kristen wasn't around, testing boundaries, pushing harder each time. One night about 6 months ago, Blake shoved Ethan into a wall when he politely asked them to leave because Sophie was trying to sleep upstairs. Ethan tried to stand his ground, tried to establish some basic boundaries. That's when the first real beating happened. They cornered him in the garage one Saturday afternoon, told him he was embarrassing the family, that he needed to learn his place. Craig held him while Blake hit him, methodical and cold, like he was teaching a lesson rather than losing his temper. They warned him not to tell anyone, especially not Kristen. They said no one would believe him anyway, and if he tried to make it a problem, they'd make sure he lost everything. His marriage, his daughter, his reputation. They'd paint him as unstable, violent, a liar. And because they were Kristen's brothers, because the family always closed ranks around their own, Ethan knew they could do it. He'd seen how Kristen's parents, Frank and Patricia, doted on Blake and Craig, how they could do no wrong in their eyes. So he stayed silent. He took the bruises and the threats and the humiliation, and he tried to survive. The beatings became more frequent. Blake would show up while Kristen was at work, push his way inside, and use Ethan as a punching bag for whatever frustration he was feeling that day. Craig would join sometimes, holding Ethan down while Blake worked him over. They were careful, mostly body shots that could be hidden under clothing, occasional facial bruises that Ethan explained away as accidents at work or clumsiness around the house. Kristen noticed the bruises but accepted his explanations without question. Maybe she didn't want to see the truth. Maybe she was willfully blind to what her brothers were doing. Either way, she never pushed, never demanded real answers, never chose to protect her husband over maintaining peace with her family. The worst part, Ethan told me, was how they used Sophie as leverage. They'd make subtle threats about what could happen to a little girl if her father wasn't careful. They'd talk about custody battles, about how judges always favor the mother, about how easy it would be to make Ethan look like an unfit parent. Those threats kept him paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "I'm afraid all the time," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Afraid they'll escalate, afraid they'll hurt Sophie, afraid Kristen will choose them over me if I force her to pick a side. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't see a way out." That's when he looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed and desperate, and asked if I would help him. Not in some vague, eventual way. He needed help immediately. He said he needed to disappear for a while, to get away and breathe and figure out what to do next. But he couldn't just leave. Blake and Craig would go after him, or worse, they'd take their frustration out on Sophie. He needed someone to take his place. Just for a little while, just long enough to buy him time. And because we were twins, because we'd spent our whole lives being mistaken for each other, because no one outside our immediate family could really tell us apart, unless they looked closely, he thought maybe I could do it. He was asking me to become him, to step into his life, wear his face, endure what he'd been enduring while he slipped away somewhere safe and tried to heal. I should have said no. Any reasonable person would have. The plan was insane, dangerous, and legally questionable at best. But I didn't say no. I looked at my brother, my twin, my other half, the person I'd shared a womb with, who knew me better than anyone else in the world, and I saw how broken he was. I saw the bruises and the fear and the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I couldn't let him go back to that house alone. I couldn't let those men keep hurting him, grinding him down until there was nothing left. So I said yes. I told him I would do it. I would trade places with him, move into his life, face his tormentors, and buy him the time he needed to escape. But more than that, I decided I would make sure Blake and Craig paid for what they'd done. I wouldn't just survive in his place. I would set a trap. I would gather evidence, expose their cruelty, and dismantle the power they held over him. I would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. We spent the next 3 days planning every detail with military precision. I moved into Ethan's apartment temporarily while we prepared, using my condo as a staging area for the equipment and documentation we'd need. Ethan walked me through every aspect of the routines that made up his daily existence, from how he tied his shoes to the specific route he took to work, avoiding certain streets because they added stress to his morning. He showed me his office workspace through photos and videos he'd taken discreetly on his phone. I memorized the names of his coworkers: David, who sat in the next cubicle and always wanted to talk about sports; Linda from accounting, who brought in homemade cookies every Friday; his boss Jennifer, who had unrealistic expectations about turnaround times. I learned about his ongoing marketing campaigns, familiarized myself with the clients he was handling, studied the industry jargon he used daily. The evenings were dedicated to understanding his home life. Ethan played videos of Sophie at dinner, during playtime, getting ready for bed. I studied how he interacted with her, the specific voices he used when reading different characters in her storybooks, the way he'd count down from 5 when she was stalling bedtime, how he'd celebrate when she drew a new picture. Sophie was obsessed with dinosaurs lately, particularly velociraptors, and she loved drawing elaborate scenes of them in jungles. She had a stuffed triceratops named Mr. Stompy that went everywhere with her. Kristen was more complicated. Ethan explained how she liked her coffee: 2 sugars, splash of cream, served in the blue mug she'd gotten from her parents. She worked as a billing coordinator at a medical office downtown, usually left the house by 7:30, got home around 5:15. She hated discussing work at home, preferred watching reality TV shows in the evenings, and had gotten into the habit of scrolling through social media on her phone, rather than engaging in actual conversation. She wasn't always like this, Ethan said quietly one night. When we first got married, we'd talk for hours. We'd make plans, dream about the future, but somewhere along the way, she started pulling back. I think it was when her brothers started coming around more often. She chose them over me, piece by piece, until there wasn't much of us left. The marriage had been eroding for at least 2 years, he explained. Small moments of disconnection that added up over time. Kristen prioritizing her brother's opinions over Ethan's feelings, dismissing his concerns about their intrusive behavior, making jokes at his expense when they mocked him, treating it like harmless sibling teasing instead of the systematic undermining it actually was. Most importantly, Ethan walked me through the dynamics with Blake and Craig in painful detail. Blake typically showed up on Wednesday evenings, sometimes Thursday afternoons if he'd taken the day off work. He'd let himself in without knocking, using the key Kristen had given him during the first year of their marriage. Blake would immediately establish dominance, helping himself to food, commenting on the state of the house, asking intrusive questions about their finances or marriage. The physical intimidation would start subtle, standing too close, backing Ethan into corners during conversation, touching him in aggressive ways disguised as friendly pats on the shoulder that were actually just hard enough to hurt. If Kristen wasn't home, Blake would escalate, shoving Ethan against walls, grabbing his shirt collar, getting right in his face while making threats about what would happen if he ever complained to Kristen about their visits. Craig was different, more calculated in his approach. He'd show up on weekends, usually Saturday mornings, when Kristen took Sophie to her parents' house for a few hours. Craig would bring takeout, act friendly initially, then gradually shift into interrogation mode. He'd ask about Ethan's job performance, his salary, his retirement planning, his adequacy as a husband and father. Every question was designed to undermine and diminish. Craig's the one who first threatened Sophie, Ethan told me, his voice shaking with the memory. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Just mentioned how easy it would be for a kid to have an accident, how tragic it would be if something happened to her, because her father couldn't protect her properly. He smiled while he said it, Nathan. Smiled like he was enjoying watching me realize how powerless I was. Both brothers had keys, both felt entitled to show up whenever they wanted, and both had made it crystal clear that if Ethan ever told Kristen the full extent of what was happening, they'd make sure he lost everything. They'd already discussed strategy, how they'd claim Ethan was mentally unstable, how they'd present his inevitable defensive injuries as evidence he was violent, how they'd paint themselves as concerned brothers trying to protect their sister from an abusive husband. It was a calculated campaign of terror, and they'd been getting away with it because Ethan was paralyzed by fear of losing Sophie, and because no one in Kristen's family would believe him over her brothers. I set up hidden cameras throughout the house, small devices designed to look like everyday objects. A clock on the mantle, a phone charger on the kitchen counter, a smoke detector in the hallway, all of them recording continuously to cloud storage that only I could access. I bought a small audio recorder that looked like a pen, kept it in my shirt pocket whenever I was home. I documented everything: the bruises Ethan already had, his account of previous incidents, copies of medical records from an ER visit where he'd claimed to have fallen downstairs. On the fourth day, we made the switch. Ethan cut his hair to match the slightly longer style I'd been wearing. We swapped clothes, wallets, phones, keys. I drove him to a remote cabin I'd rented 3 hours north of Seattle, helped him settle in with groceries and supplies for an extended stay. The place had no connection to either of us. Paid for with cash, off the grid enough that he could decompress without looking over his shoulder constantly. Stay here, I told him as we stood in the cabin's small living room. Rest, heal, process everything. I'll handle Blake and Craig. I'll document everything they do, and when I have enough evidence, we'll destroy them legally. Ethan looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with guilt, mixed with something like hope. I don't know how to thank you for this. You don't need to thank me. You're my brother. Now go take a long shower, sleep in a bed where you feel safe, and let yourself heal. I'll check in every few days. I drove back to Seattle that afternoon and moved into Ethan's house. Kristen was at work, Sophie at daycare. I walked through the rooms, familiarizing myself with the space, the layout, the small details that would help me sell the illusion. Family photos on the walls, Sophie's artwork stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, Kristen's reading glasses on the coffee table. When Kristen came home that evening with Sophie in tow, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce, one of Ethan's standard weeknight meals. I'd practiced his body language in the mirror, the slightly hunched shoulders, the way he'd learned to make himself smaller, less threatening, less noticeable. "Hey," I said when she walked in, keeping my voice level and neutral. "Hey," she replied, barely looking at me as she set down her purse and helped Sophie out of her jacket. Traffic was awful. "Sophie, go wash your hands for dinner." The 4-year-old bounded off toward the bathroom, and Kristen moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone going through familiar motions. She didn't seem to notice anything different about me. Why would she? I was doing an excellent job of being Ethan, the beaten-down, careful version he'd become. That first evening passed without major incident. I read Sophie her bedtime story, a book about a velociraptor who wanted to be a ballerina, doing the voices for all the dinosaurs exactly the way Ethan had taught me. Sophie giggled at the T-Rex's silly dance moves and hugged Mr. Stompy tight when I tucked her in. She looked up at me with complete trust, and the weight of what I was doing hit me hard. This little girl was depending on her father to protect her, and I had to maintain the illusion perfectly to keep her safe. Kristen watched TV in the living room while I cleaned the kitchen, methodically wiping down counters and loading the dishwasher exactly how Ethan said he did it every night. She barely acknowledged me, absorbed in some reality show about wealthy housewives fighting over catering drama. We went to bed without much conversation. I slept in the guest room, claiming I had a cold and didn't want to get her sick, an excuse Ethan had suggested, knowing Kristen had a thing about germs and would welcome the separation without question. The guest room became my operations center. After Kristen fell asleep, I'd review the day's recordings, make detailed notes, back up everything to multiple cloud storage locations. I created a spreadsheet tracking every incident, every threat, every moment that could be used as evidence. Dates, times, people present, exact words spoken, physical actions taken, all documented with the precision I normally applied to engineering projects. Blake showed up on Wednesday evening, right on schedule. I was home from work around 6, heating up leftovers in the microwave, when I heard his key in the lock. He walked in like he owned the place, didn't knock or announce himself, just strode into the kitchen and grabbed a soda from the refrigerator without asking. "Hey there, champ," he said with that condescending tone Ethan had warned me about. Blake was a big guy, 6'2", probably 220, all of it from lifting weights at the gym rather than functional strength. He had that swagger of someone who'd never been seriously challenged, who'd spent his whole life getting away with bullying behavior because he was bigger and louder than everyone else. Rough day at the office pushing papers? I kept my eyes down, playing the role Ethan had inhabited for over a year. Just long, lots of meetings. Yeah, meetings. Blake laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. Must be real tough sitting in conference rooms talking about marketing strategies while real men do actual work. My crew poured foundation for a 3-story office building today. Built something real, you know? Something that'll actually last. The implication was clear. Ethan's career was meaningless. His work was worthless. He was less of a man because he didn't do physical labor. It was the same pattern Ethan had described, the same script Blake used to establish dominance and make his brother-in-law feel inferior. I didn't respond, just focused on my plate of reheated casserole. Blake circled the kitchen island, getting into my space, crowding me against the counter. This was how it always started, Ethan had explained. Small provocations designed to test boundaries and reinforce the power dynamic. "Kristen working late again?" Blake asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "She'll be home around 7. Good, good. Wouldn't want her to see her husband being such a pathetic loser, right?" He shoved my shoulder, not hard enough to actually hurt, but aggressive enough to be intimidating. "You're embarrassing her, you know that? My sister deserves better than some soft marketing geek who can't stand up for himself. She could have married anyone, but she settled for you." The recorder in my pocket was capturing every word with perfect clarity. The camera disguised as a kitchen clock was recording the video in high definition, showing Blake's aggressive posture, his invading my personal space, his hand on my shoulder. I let him continue his routine, absorbing the insults, responding with the submissive body language he expected. Hunched shoulders, downcast eyes, minimal verbal responses that wouldn't provoke further aggression. Blake spent about 20 minutes establishing his dominance. He criticized everything: the cleanliness of the kitchen, the food I was eating, my work clothes, my posture, my general existence. Every insult was designed to chip away at self-worth, to reinforce the idea that Ethan was worthless and should be grateful Blake and Craig tolerated him at all. When Kristen's car pulled into the driveway, Blake's demeanor shifted instantly. He became friendly, jovial, the concerned brother just checking in on his sister's family. He ruffled my hair in a gesture that might look affectionate to an outsider, but was actually another assertion of dominance, treating me like a child who needed his approval. "Good talk, champ," he said loudly enough for Kristen to hear as she walked through the door. "Just making sure my sister's being taken care of properly. Family's gotta look out for each other, right?" Kristen smiled at him, oblivious to or deliberately ignoring what had just happened. "Thanks for checking in, Blake. You want to stay for dinner?" "Nah, got plans, but I'll see you this weekend at Mom and Dad's." He shot me a warning look as he left, a silent reminder to keep my mouth shut about everything that had just transpired. After he left, I sat at the dinner table with Kristen and Sophie, playing the role of the subdued, beaten-down husband and father, while internally cataloging everything for the eventual confrontation. Sophie chattered about her day at daycare, something about finger painting, and a friend who'd brought in cookies for everyone. I listened and responded appropriately, maintaining the illusion while the recorder in my pocket continued documenting every moment of my transformed life. That night, after Kristen and Sophie were asleep, I reviewed the footage and audio. It was perfect. Clear video showing Blake's aggression, pristine audio capturing every insult and threat. I added it to my growing evidence file, organizing everything chronologically, creating a narrative that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. I went through the same pattern for 7 weeks. Blake showed up twice a week, sometimes alone, sometimes with Craig. They'd let themselves in, mock me, push me around, occasionally escalate to actual violence. I documented everything, every insult, every shove, every punch. The cameras captured it all in high definition. Craig was different from Blake, less overtly aggressive but more calculating. He'd make threats about Sophie, talk about how easy it would be to prove I was an unfit father, describe in detail what could happen in a custody battle. Those recordings were particularly damning, showing premeditation and psychological abuse. The physical violence escalated around week 4. Blake showed up angry about something at his job, and he took it out on me in the garage. Craig held my arms while Blake worked me over. Body shots mostly. A few hits to the face that I couldn't block. I let it happen, gritting my teeth, focusing on the recorder in my pocket and the camera I'd hidden in the garage ceiling. Kristen saw the new bruises that night. I was in the bathroom assessing the damage when she walked in. For a moment, I thought she might finally ask the right questions, might finally choose to see what was actually happening. But instead, she just sighed and said, "You need to be more careful." That response told me everything I needed to know about her complicity. She wasn't actively participating in the abuse, but she was enabling it through willful blindness. She'd chosen the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. By week 6, I had dozens of hours of footage and audio recordings. Blake and Craig had assaulted me 7 times, made countless threats, and demonstrated a clear pattern of sustained abuse. I had enough evidence to bury them legally. Now I just needed to spring the trap. I planned it carefully. Kristen's parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and the whole family was gathering for a dinner at their house. It was the perfect opportunity. Everyone in one place. No way for Blake and Craig to avoid the confrontation. Maximum exposure for their crimes. I told Ethan my plan during our nightly phone check-in. He was hesitant at first, worried about the potential for violence, but I convinced him this was the safest way. Public exposure, with witnesses, documentation ready to hand over to authorities. The night before the anniversary dinner, I prepared everything. Edited the most damning footage into a compilation video, organized the audio recordings chronologically, compiled hospital records and photographs of injuries. I burned copies to multiple USB drives, uploaded everything to secure cloud storage, and prepared packets for the police, Kristen's family, and Ethan's divorce attorney. Yes, I'd already retained one for him. Saturday evening, I arrived at Frank and Patricia's house with Kristen and Sophie. The place was full of extended family and family friends, probably 40 people total. Blake and Craig were already there, holding court in the living room, telling some story that had everyone laughing. When they saw me walk in, Blake smirked and made some comment about me actually showing up for once. Craig muttered something to his friend that made them both chuckle. They had no idea what was coming. Dinner was the usual family affair. Too much food, too many conversations happening at once, Frank telling stories about the early years of his marriage, while Patricia beamed beside him. I played my role perfectly, staying quiet, keeping my head down, being the diminished version of Ethan they all expected. After dessert, Frank stood up to give a speech thanking everyone for coming. When he finished, I stood up too. The room went quiet, confused. This wasn't part of the program. "I'd like to say something as well," I announced, keeping my voice steady. "About family and what it means to protect the people you love." Kristen shot me a warning look, clearly uncomfortable with me drawing attention. Blake and Craig exchanged glances, probably thinking I was about to embarrass myself somehow. I pulled out a small remote control and pointed it at the TV mounted on the dining room wall. I'd arranged with Frank earlier to set up a laptop connection, claiming I wanted to show family photos. He'd agreed without question. For the past 7 weeks, I continued as the screen flickered to life. I've been documenting something that's been happening in this family. Something that everyone here needs to see. The first video started playing. Blake entering Ethan's house uninvited, immediately beginning his verbal assault. The audio was crystal clear. Every insult and threat captured perfectly. The room went completely silent as people watched. Patricia gasped. Frank's face went red. Kristen turned pale. Blake started to stand, but his father barked at him to sit down and watch. The compilation continued. 7 weeks of abuse condensed into a devastating 12-minute presentation. Blake shoving me against walls. Craig holding me while Blake threw punches. Both of them making explicit threats about Sophie, about destroying Ethan's life if he ever spoke up. The footage was undeniable, time-stamped, showing faces clearly. Some of the women in the room started crying. Frank looked like he might have a heart attack. Blake and Craig sat frozen, their faces cycling through shock, anger, and finally fear as they realized the magnitude of what they were watching. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. I stood there in front of 40 witnesses and said, "Blake and Craig have been systematically abusing Ethan for over a year. They've beaten him, threatened him, terrorized his daughter, and turned his home into a prison. And everyone in this family, everyone, let it happen." Blake exploded out of his chair, face twisted with rage. "That's not... You can't! This is taken out of context." "Context?" I repeated calmly. "Please explain the context where it's acceptable to beat your sister's husband and threaten a 4-year-old child." Craig tried a different approach, turning to his parents with desperation. "Dad, this is insane. He's making this up somehow. We were just what? I interrupted. Just terrorizing someone for a year? Just breaking multiple laws, including assault, battery, terroristic threats, and criminal trespass? All of which I've documented and reported to the police. That's when I revealed the second part of my plan. Two uniformed officers walked through the front door. I'd contacted them earlier, explained the situation, provided preliminary evidence. They'd agreed to stand by during the dinner, waiting for my signal. The officers approached Blake and Craig, informing them they were under arrest for assault, battery, criminal threats, and harassment. Blake started yelling about lawyers and false accusations. Craig went pale and silent. Both were handcuffed while their parents watched in horror, while friends and extended family stood frozen, while Kristen sobbed in the corner. As they were being let out, Blake turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. "You're going to regret this. We'll destroy you in court. We'll take everything." I looked at him calmly and said, "You already tried to destroy someone for over a year. You tried to break him, to make him feel powerless and worthless. But I'm not your victim anymore." Blake's face went blank with confusion at that last statement, but before he could process it, the officers pulled him toward the door. Both brothers were loaded into patrol cars and driven away. The house was suddenly much quieter, just the soft sound of Patricia crying and people shifting uncomfortably. I turned to the remaining guests. "I think it's time for everyone to leave. If anyone wants copies of the evidence for your own understanding of what's been happening, I can provide that. Otherwise, please go." Most people couldn't leave fast enough, offering awkward condolences or apologies, or just fleeing in shock. Patricia approached me before she left, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice breaking. I didn't know they were doing this." I looked at her and saw genuine horror in her eyes. "Maybe you didn't know the extent of it," I replied, "but there were signs. There were moments when you could have asked questions, could have wondered why your son-in-law looked increasingly afraid and beaten down. Those signs were there. Everyone chose not to see them." She nodded, crying harder, and left with Frank, who still hadn't said a word. Soon it was just me and Kristen in the living room. She sat on the couch, face blotchy from crying, and looked up at me with something like hatred. "How could you do this to my family?" she asked, voice shaking. "We're going to lose everything because of you." I sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted, as the adrenaline that had been keeping me going started to fade. "Kristen, your brothers have been beating your husband for over a year. They terrorized your daughter. They turned your home into a place of fear and violence, and you let them. You enabled them. You chose their approval over your family's safety. This didn't happen because of me. This happened because of choices you and your brothers made over and over again." She shook her head, still in denial. "But they were just being protective, making sure you were treating me right." I let out a bitter laugh. "Protecting you from what? From a husband who loved you and wanted to build a life with you? They weren't protecting you, Kristen. They were controlling you, and they were abusing him. And you let them, because it was easier than standing up to them." I stood up then and told her that divorce papers would be filed within the week, that Ethan would be seeking sole custody of Sophie, and that she should get a lawyer. She looked at me in confusion, starting to ask something, and that's when I decided to tell her the truth. "I'm not your husband," I said clearly. "I'm his twin brother, Nathan. Ethan came to me 7 weeks ago, covered in bruises, terrified, broken. He asked me to switch places with him so he could get away and heal. So I stepped into his life and took his place. I've been living here, taking the abuse he was taking, documenting everything, building a case to destroy the men who were destroying him." I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally understanding. You're his brother? This whole time? Everything you've been doing to Ethan for the past 7 weeks, you've been doing to me," I continued. "Every hit, every insult, every moment of cruelty. I took it for him, and I documented all of it. Your husband is safe, away from you and your brothers. He's been healing, and I've been gathering evidence to make sure Blake and Craig face consequences for what they've done." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something break behind her eyes, some final piece of denial shattering. Then she put her face in her hands and sobbed. I felt no sympathy. I told her I'd be staying in the house that night, but she should probably go to her parents' place. I went upstairs to the guest room I'd been using. Behind me, I heard her crying, but I closed the door and shut it out. It was done. I'd exposed them, sprung the trap, and they'd walked right into it. Everything else would unfold from here. The legal proceedings, the consequences, the rebuilding. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan at the cabin. He answered on the first ring, voice tight with anxiety. I told him everything about the dinner, the evidence, the reactions, Blake and Craig being arrested, Kristen's complicity being exposed, how it was finally over. He was silent for a long moment. Then I heard him crying. Great, gasping sobs of relief and release. Thank you, he said when he could speak again. Thank you. I don't know how to ever thank you enough. You don't need to thank me, I told him. You're my brother. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Now stay at the cabin for a few more days while things settle, then you can come home to your new apartment. I'd already helped him secure a one-bedroom place across town, far from Kristen and her family. A fresh start where he could rebuild his life and have a safe space for Sophie during custody visits. We talked for a while longer, both of us processing everything, exhausted and relieved, and still struggling to believe it was really over. After we hung up, I just sat there in the quiet room, feeling the bruises ache, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones, and I let myself breathe. The legal aftermath unfolded over the next several months. Blake and Craig were both charged with multiple felonies: assault in the second degree, criminal threats, stalking, and harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. Both eventually took plea deals rather than risk trial. Blake got 18 months in county jail, plus 3 years probation. Craig got 14 months plus probation. Both were ordered to have no contact with Ethan or Sophie indefinitely. Ethan's divorce from Kristen was finalized 4 months later. He got sole physical custody of Sophie, with Kristen having supervised visitation rights. The judge who reviewed all the evidence was appalled at how she'd enabled the abuse, and made it clear in his ruling that Ethan was the stable, protective parent. Kristen's parents, Frank and Patricia, actually reached out to Ethan afterward. They apologized profusely, said they were ashamed of their sons and their own blindness. They wanted to maintain a relationship with Sophie if Ethan would allow it. He agreed to supervised visits, recognizing they were Sophie's grandparents, and they seemed genuinely remorseful. As for me, I moved back to my condo and my regular life. The bruises healed, the soreness faded, but the experience changed me in ways I'm still processing. I have a deeper understanding now of what it means to be truly vulnerable, to be trapped in a situation where asking for help seems impossible. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. My dad gave my golden brother the family company that I built for years and left me with scraps. So I left and watched them collapse without me, but now they are begging. Hey Reddit, you ever have a job where your boss treats you like you're 12 years old doing chores for allowance, except the boss is your own dad? Yeah, that was my life for way too long. I, 32 male, was busting my back in the family business while he acted like I was just the hired help with the same last name. It finally hit a point where I'd had enough, so I made a move that ended up flipping everything upside down. And let's just say, they didn't see it coming. So my old man owns a business. Blue-collar stuff. Not glamorous, but it pays well enough that he can act like he's some kind of business messiah in our small town. Built it from nothing, he says every time someone compliments the shop, like he didn't have me busting my back while he sat in the office pretending to understand spreadsheets. Now here's the kicker. My older brother is the second coming of Christ in his eyes, got a business degree from a May college, and suddenly he's the chosen one. I'm not exaggerating. The guy got a C+ in econ once, and my dad still framed the exam like it was a Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, I've been in the field since I was 17, doing the actual work, grinding, fixing, troubleshooting messes other guys walked away from. And you know what I get? Thanks, sport. No stake, no say. Just a pat on the head and back to the grind. Dad's been grooming my brother to take over since day one. Not even subtle. I was literally in the room when he told me. And I quote, "You'll never run this place. You're better with tools, not decisions." Dead serious. Like I'm a caveman with a hammer, and he's the only guy with enough brain cells to check email. It didn't even sting at that point. I just stared at him. Like, wow. At least pretend to respect me. I asked if there was any room for me in the business once he retires. You know, something. A percentage. A piece. I didn't even ask for half. Just something to show I mattered. And he gives me this smug little nod and goes, "You'll get something after I'm gone." What a guy. Basically told me to wait for him to die and maybe, he'll leave me a few scraps in the will. Gee, thanks, Pops. Can't wait to inherit a broken forklift and some rusty tools after you croak. My brother? Sat there in the meeting with his arms crossed, smirking like he just won the lottery. Didn't say a word. Didn't even pretend to back me up. Of course not. He's the golden child. Has been since birth. Got the bigger bedroom with his own TV, the newer bike every 2 years like clockwork, less chores, lighter punishments. You name it. Dude could sneeze and get praised for spreading innovation. I remember one time he accidentally left the garage open overnight and raccoons got into everything. My dad blamed me for not checking it behind him. Another time, he crashed Dad's pickup truck into a tree in the driveway, and somehow I got yelled at for not warning him about the road being slippery. Like, what was I supposed to do? Salt the whole neighborhood? That kind of golden. Meanwhile, me? I was labeled the impulsive one because I dropped out of college for a year. Not to party or mess around, I got a solid job fixing HVAC systems and actually learned real skills. Best hands-on experience I've ever had. But to my dad, that move was like committing treason. One gap year, and I'm a wild card for life. Every conversation after that came with some passive-aggressive comment about finishing what you start or sticking to the plan. Meanwhile, my brother got caught straight up plagiarizing an entire essay in college, copy-pasted from some online archive, and my dad spun it into entrepreneurial thinking because he's resourceful under pressure. I swear if he burned the house down, my dad would have said it was an experiment in fire safety. I wasn't the kid who rebelled. I was the kid who got ignored unless something broke, and then suddenly I was the only one who knew how to fix it. My brother got celebrated for showing up. I had to bleed just to get a good job once a year. That meeting was just the latest slap in the face. My dad laid out his grand succession plan, complete with a new title and shiny office for my brother. I asked, barely asked, if there was a place for me in that plan. Not even half the business, just a little piece, a stake. Something to show I wasn't just a glorified wrench monkey. And what did I get? You'll get something after I'm gone. So yeah, after that little heart-to-heart about how I was basically a glorified temp worker in my own family's company, I hit my limit. Went home, sat in my car for like half an hour just staring at the dash, thinking about how stupid I was for giving this place so many years. I've carried that shop through all kinds of crap. Deadlines, broken machines, lazy hires, you name it. I was the guy they called when stuff hit the fan. And all I've gotten back is attitude and second-place treatment. The next morning, I typed up a 2 weeks notice. No drama, no rant, just a clean, I'm done. Handed it to my dad during lunch like I was dropping off his dry cleaning. He glanced at it and said, "Is this about what I said yesterday?" I said, "Nah, just time to move on." And he hits me with, "All right, good luck, but you won't last without me and your brother." I actually smiled. That's the part that got me. He really believed that. Like I was going to crash and burn the second I didn't have him micromanaging my every move or my brother messing things up beside me. No, are you sure? No, let's talk this through. Find just a weird little ego trip and right back to chewing his sandwich. That told me everything I needed to know. I was never meant to be anything more than the backup wrench in the drawer. Pulled out when things got messy, ignored the rest of the time. But the fact that he thought I couldn't survive without them? Man, that was almost funnier than it was insulting. Anyways, I still showed up for work like normal, even though every second felt like a joke. My brother barely said 2 words to me all week, acted like I was invisible. I think he figured I'd come crawling back or something. Then a few days later, Jared, the guy who represents our biggest client, comes by asking if I can handle a project next week. I tell him, can't. I won't be here. He gives me this confused look and goes, "Wait, what?" So I explain I'm leaving. Don't give details. Just say it's personal. I don't want to sound bitter, even though I was ready to scream into a pillow every night. He looks stunned. He's like, "You're the only guy we ask for." Which, yeah, I knew that. They always requested me. Not my brother. Not the guy with the degree. Me. Because I actually got stuff done. He asked if I had another job lined up. I told him no, not yet. And it was true. I figured I'd freelance for a bit or just take a breather. Not a lot of companies need someone with my skill set, but I was willing to figure it out. And that should have been the end of it. Me quietly bowing out, finding something else, moving on. But turns out, someone else had bigger plans for me. The morning after, I walk into the shop and my dad's sitting at his desk like nothing happened. Doesn't even look up. I say morning, and he goes, "You still coming in on time even after quitting?" That's new. Yeah, real classy. Dude acts like I used to roll in 3 hours late, when I've been the one unlocking the damn place half the time because he couldn't get out of bed before 9. And yeah, I was still showing up. Not for him. Not for the paycheck, just because I wanted to walk out the right way. No loose ends. No, he left us hanging stories. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of saying I ghosted or bailed. I'd already mentally pieced out. I was just tying up the last few knots before I left the mess behind. So I head to the floor, and guess what? Half the morning crew is standing around because the delivery truck didn't get loaded last night. My brother was supposed to handle it since I'm stepping back. He didn't. And now the order's late and the client's already pissed. So who ends up jumping in to fix it? Yep, me. Again. And while I'm hauling pallets to save their rep from collapsing faster than Dad's hairline, guess who walks in holding a cold brew and acting like a manager? Let's make sure this doesn't happen again, my brother says. No, sorry. No, thanks for covering. Just that smug, I watched a TED Talk tone he uses when he's trying to sound like a leader. I stare at him. Yeah, maybe try loading it next time instead of delegating to the void. He blinks. Doesn't respond. Just turns around and walks off to review numbers, which I'm 100% sure means scrolling LinkedIn and pretending he's networking. Then, this is gold, around lunch, my dad finally calls me into his office. Big man wants to chat. So I sit down, arms crossed, already bracing for a guilt trip. He opens with, "So, I thought about your decision to leave, and I'm willing to raise your pay." I raise an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, what's the offer?" $1.50 more an hour, he says. Dead serious. Leans back like he just offered me stock in Tesla. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. That's what you think I'm worth? After all these years? He frowns like I just insulted him. It's a good rate. Most people your age aren't making that kind of money. Brother, I'm not most people. I'm the one your biggest client specifically asks for. I'm the one who trained half your staff. I'm the one who made you look like a genius while you sat in your office watching old car restoration videos and pretending to do payroll. I didn't say all that, obviously. Just stood up, said I'll pass, and walked out. Next day, chaos. Jared shows up around 10 a.m., already looking annoyed. I guess he was told the install was on track. Except it wasn't. Brother Dearest gave him a fake update because he didn't want to admit he forgot to order the mounting hardware. Real pro stuff. Jared spots me across the floor and beelines over. Hey, can you explain why nothing's ready for the Vantry job? I blink. You'll have to ask the new manager. I'm just a spectator now. He looks at me, then looks over at my brother trying to Google industrial mount brackets on his phone like nobody's watching. So, you're really leaving? Jared asks, quieter. Yeah, Friday's my last day. He nods slowly. Where to? I shake my head. No clue. Might take a break. That man paused like he just found out his dentist was quitting mid-root canal. You're the only reason we kept the contract this long. Just saying. That felt good. Not even gonna lie. And that's when the twist came. Jared's boss, never met him before, shows up. Real serious guy. Clean suit, clipboard, the whole vibe. Spends 10 minutes watching the floor, checking equipment, then pulls me aside. Mind if I ask you a question? He says. Sure. You ever think about running your own crew? I blink. Like, freelance? I mean full-time, in-house. We've been thinking of internalizing this operation, but we've had trouble finding someone who knows the work and can manage people. You come highly recommended. I just stood there, jaw probably on the floor. I hadn't even looked for a job, and this guy's offering me one on the spot. He tells me to think about it. Gives me a rough figure. Spoiler. It's more than I've ever made in my life. Plus office, benefits, equipment budget, the works. I didn't say yes. Not yet. Still had 2 more days on the clock, and I wasn't going to give my dad the satisfaction of saying I quit early. But oh man, my brain was already packing my mental boxes. That afternoon, my dad walks by the loading area and sees me talking to Jared and his boss. Doesn't ask what's up. Doesn't even pause. Just gives me a look like I'm wasting company time chatting. I should have said something. I should have told him, that guy's offering me a real future while you're still handing out nickels and calling it a raise. But nah, I just smiled. Let him be ignorant. He thinks I'm just some angry quitter. In reality, I'm the guy his clients want to hire away. That night, I got home, cracked open a soda, and stared at my phone for like an hour. Didn't even open apps. Just sat there, thinking. They don't know it yet, but they're about to feel what it's like when the spare son walks away. And this time, I'm not coming back. So Friday rolled around, my official last day. I came in early, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I had one last thing to finish. The Vantry order was still a mess, and I was the only person who even knew where half the supplies were. Could have let it crash and burn, but I had one rule. If my name's attached, it doesn't go out half done. I finish clean so nobody gets to say I was the problem. Of course, my dad didn't say a word. Not even a thanks, not a handshake, not even a fake good luck. He just walked past me in the morning like I was air and told the receptionist to get coffee for the team, which apparently didn't include me anymore. Not that I was expecting anything different. At this point, if the building was on fire and I was holding the extinguisher, he'd still hand it to my brother and tell me to step aside. My brother, by the way, spent the entire day fumbling through a phone call with another client, pretending he knew what they were talking about. I overheard him telling them the install time would probably be standard. What does that even mean? Standard like last month's job that took 3 days longer because he forgot to measure the bracket space? Or standard like he makes up numbers and hopes no one notices? Anyway, around noon, Jared came by. This time with his boss again. No clipboard today. Just a folder and a smile. Got a minute? He asked. I wiped my hands on a towel, nodded, and followed him out to the lot. His boss handed me the offer in writing. 3-year contract. Salary that almost made me laugh out loud. Bonus structure. Benefits. My own budget. An office. Yes, again, with the mini fridge. They even added a line for me to approve the hiring of 2 techs under me. I didn't hesitate. Signed right there on the hood of my truck. Not a single pause. Not a single, but what about my family? Or, is this fair to my dad? They made it crystal clear. I was disposable to them. So now they get to see what happens when the extra walks away with the client that kept their business floating. And don't get it twisted. I didn't steal anyone. Jared came to me. They needed someone who knew what they were doing. I just happened to be the only one who fit that bill. I walked back inside with my signed copy still in my hand. Didn't hide it. Didn't flaunt it either. Just put it in my locker with the rest of my stuff. Then I did the pettiest thing I've ever done, and I don't even feel bad about it. I went to the break room and cleared out my locker, took my tools, my coffee mug, my gloves, everything. But I left the plaque they gave me 5 years ago that said, Employee of the Quarter, sitting right on top of my brother's desk. He didn't even earn one, ever. Just thought it'd look good there now that he's in charge. And right before I walked out, my dad finally comes over. No greeting, just that annoyed, tight-jawed look he does when he realizes he can't fix something with fake authority. So you're really doing this? He says, arms crossed. I blink at him. Doing what exactly? You know what I mean. Leaving. Taking the client. I smiled. I didn't take anything. They offered. You said I wasn't leadership material. They disagreed. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. You made your choice, Dad. You wanted one son to run the place and one to follow orders. Looks like the follower got promoted elsewhere. And then I walked out. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't care. By Monday, I was in my new workspace. Air conditioning. My name on a door. Brand new tools. Assigned parking. The 2 guys I hired actually showed up on time and asked me for instructions without rolling their eyes or acting like they knew better. It was weird. Being respected. Jared came in midweek just to check in. He shook my hand and said, Glad we got you. I just nodded and said, You got the best part of that deal, trust me. Meanwhile, I start hearing little things through the grapevine. One of the guys from the old shop texted me, Yo, they're scrambling now. Can't even get the wiring right without you. Another one messaged, Your brother told a client we could wing it, on a 5-figure installation. And my dad tried to call Jared's boss to clear the air. Apparently blamed me for stirring the pot. The guy hung up on him halfway through the call. They're flailing. And I'm over here with my feet up, reviewing equipment orders like I'm running the place. Because now, I am. Revenge didn't need yelling or lawsuits or drama. I just walked out, took the piece they never valued, and made it the one thing they couldn't replace. And no, I don't feel bad. They made the rules. I just learned how to play them better. So, less than a week into my new gig, I get a random LinkedIn message. From Randy. He's one of the techs at my dad's place. Not someone I'd ever expect to hear from unless a forklift ran over his foot or something. His message just says, Bro, you would not believe what's happening over here. I reply with, Try me. 10 minutes later, he sends a wall of texts. Turns out 2 more clients pulled out. Not because of me, don't get it twisted, but because the golden boy forgot to send a follow-up quote to one of them and completely misread the specs for another job. They showed up with the wrong equipment. The client literally threw them off the lot. Oh, and that late shipment from last week? The Vantry one I bailed them out on before I left? They delivered it without the bracket mounts because my brother assumed the client would already have those installed. Brother, it's your company's job to install them. That's the whole deal. They had to comp the job. Lost money. And apparently that triggered one of their backup clients to start looking elsewhere, just in case. The best part? My dad tried to act like I sabotaged something, told the crew someone must have tampered with the order files before leaving. Real detective work, Sherlock. Nope. I didn't touch a thing. Your golden boy just doesn't know how to click a checklist. Meanwhile, at my new job, heaven. I'm not even exaggerating. My office chair leans back. The AC works. The coffee's free and doesn't taste like burnt tires. I got 2 guys under me, Sam and Hector, who actually listen, and one of them used to work in a competitor firm. We're flying through our first project so fast, the client bumped our deadline up, not back. They were that impressed. So while I'm out here racking up W's, my dad's business is bleeding out. And then the wildest thing happened. On Friday, I get a call from a number I don't recognize. Normally, I don't answer unknowns, but I was between tasks and feeling spicy. It's my uncle, Dad's older brother, the one who co-signed the business loan years ago when they expanded. He's calm, but I can tell something's off. He goes, "Hey, I heard what happened with you leaving. Just wanted to say, good move." I blink. "Wait, what?" He says, "Your dad never gave you credit for anything. It was obvious to all of us." Brother, this is the first time anyone in the family has ever said that out loud. He tells me he got looped into a meeting earlier that week where my dad basically tried to beg for help, financial help. Says they're down 3 clients and cash flow's disrupted. In normal human speak, they're broke. Uncle said he told them flat out, "This is what happens when you build an entire operation around one kid and ignore the one doing the work." Mic drop. He even asked if I needed any help setting up additional services on my side, like maybe opening a secondary location down the line. Total 180. Guy was ready to back me now. I thanked him and told him I was good for now. But yeah, that call stuck with me. Anyway, back to the firestorm. That Monday, I get another message. This time from Lena, the front desk girl from my dad's company. She's quitting, wants to know if I'm hiring. Apparently, my brother tried to shift blame for one of the client losses onto her. She found out he told the client she forgot to confirm the delivery when he's the one who deleted the email thread by accident. He even tried to offer her a write-up to make it go away. So now they're down another employee. And then came the plot twist of all plot twists. I get a text from Jared. He sends me a screenshot. It's an email from my dad to Jared's boss. And it's wild. He accuses me of poaching the client, says I, used inside access to manipulate client relationships, and finishes it off by demanding compensation for loss of revenue due to employee misconduct. I nearly dropped my phone laughing. First off, I didn't poach Jack. They came to me. Second, nothing was underhanded, unless being better at your job than your replacement is a crime now. I called Jared immediately. He picks up laughing. "Dude, don't worry. My boss read that, shook his head, and flagged it. You're solid." I said, "Did he actually write that with a straight face?" "Apparently. He even CC'd your brother, like that made it more legit." Then Jared hit me with the kicker. My boss replied with one sentence, "We do not negotiate with incompetence." I'm not making that up. It was glorious. By Wednesday, Randy tells me they've officially started layoffs. Quiet ones, trying not to trigger panic. First 2 guys gone were from the install team. One of them was the guy who trained my brother. The irony's poetic. I should feel something, right? Sadness, maybe? Guilt? Nope. Not a drop. They made me feel small, invisible, replaceable. Now they're the ones getting replaced, and I haven't even broken a sweat. It didn't just stop there, the new kept raining on, and it didn't trickle in. It dropped like a damn safe. I was working through a supply order when Jared knocks on my office door with his phone in his hand. He's got this half grin like he just read something juicy. "You're gonna want to see this," he says. He hands me his phone. It's a forwarded email chain between a local subcontractor and a few clients that used to work with my dad's company. The subcontractor CC'd my dad and brother, and now their firm's getting reported for fraud. Apparently, my genius brother had been sending out updated invoices with adjusted rates, only they weren't approved rates. He marked up some jobs by 20 to 30% and padded the hours to make up for losses after I left. But he never told the clients, never got signatures, nothing. And guess what? One of those clients was a city municipality job. Government contract. Yeah, real smart. They were now being investigated for billing fraud on public projects. I hand the phone back and just start laughing. Loud. Probably louder than I should have. Jared just sits down and goes, "Dude, this might go nuclear." Turns out one of the clients hired a legal team to audit every invoice from the last 12 months. They're trying to figure out how deep the overcharging goes. And since most of it happened after I left, it's all Golden Boy's doing. But that's not even the worst of it. Later that afternoon, I get a call from Adam, the new front desk guy from back at the shop. He sounds freaked out. He tells me that the IRS showed up that morning. Like full-on visit. Badges, documents, questions. They wanted to speak to my dad about inconsistent financial reporting. I almost dropped my phone. Apparently, my dad had been doing more than just mismanaging money. He was funneling payments between shell accounts, some under my mom's name, She passed away 6 years ago, by the way. And delaying payroll taxes so long it triggered a full-blown audit. And my brother? According to Adam, he tried to play it cool. Said, "Oh, this is probably just a routine check." Yeah, routine IRS visits come with 2 agents, a lawyer, and a clipboard thick enough to kill a raccoon. Adam said he quit on the spot, didn't even log out of his email. Just grabbed his stuff and walked out while my dad was mid-sentence. And here's the twist that really iced the cake. They tried to pin it on me. Yep. Apparently, my dad told the IRS I was the one who set up the secondary vendor accounts, which is insane, because I never even had access to that side of the books. I was on the floor doing real work, not clicking around QuickBooks like a shady accountant with a Red Bull addiction. I got a heads up from a mutual connection, a guy who used to do security installations with us. He overheard my dad ranting that I was sabotaging the company and leaked information to competitors. This man, the same one who told me I was just the muscle. Now suddenly I'm a criminal mastermind? That night, I got a call from Jared's boss. He assured me their legal team already shut down any whispers about me being involved. "They're throwing darts blindfolded," he said. "You're fine. They're desperate. Damn right they are." By the end of that week, 3 more former clients had filed formal complaints against my dad's company. And my brother? He tried to give a statement on behalf of the company. I found the clip on Facebook. 35 seconds of him stuttering through corporate buzzwords while dodging every actual question. One lady in the comments wrote, "Why does this dude blink like he's being held hostage?" I laughed so hard I almost fell off the couch. And me? I was eating takeout in a clean office with zero stress while watching them burn the business down like they were speedrunning financial ruin. No pity, no guilt. They picked their favorite son, put him in charge, let him screw it all up. Now they're paying the price. Literally. And best believe, I'm not done watching. Because the next thing was them coming at my office door. It started with a knock on the glass. I was in my office going through supply chain estimates for the quarter, sipping on a coffee that didn't taste like it was filtered through regret. I looked up, and there they were. My dad and my brother standing just outside the main doors of my building, wearing that weird mix of trying to look professional and barely holding it together. I didn't move. Watched them through the glass like 2 stray dogs who wandered into a steakhouse. My brother looked fidgety, sweating even though it was barely 70 out. My dad had that fake calm face, the one he used whenever he was about to lie through his teeth. I took another sip. Then I got up, buzzed them in through reception, and leaned back in my chair like I wasn't about to watch a live episode of their downfall. They stepped in, awkward like middle school kids walking into the wrong classroom. "Nice place," my dad said, eyes scanning the room. I didn't respond, just stared. Let the silence do the work. "We were hoping we could talk," he added, clearing his throat. "Sit," I said, motioning to the chairs across from my desk. They sat. It was quiet for a second. Then my brother spoke first, of course. "Look, we know things got out of hand. Mistakes were made, but we're trying to move forward. Clean slate." I almost laughed. "Mistakes?" I leaned forward. "You mean the fraud investigation? The fake invoices? The shell accounts? Or the part where you tried to blame me for it?" My dad winced. My brother flinched. "All right," Dad said, holding up a hand. "I'll admit, we were in a bad spot, but we thought we could manage it, and then things escalated, faster than expected." I stared at him. This man, who once told me to stay in my lane, who said I wasn't fit to lead, now sitting across from me, coat wrinkled, face pale, eyes begging. "You're not managing anything," I said. "Your company's under investigation, your accounts are frozen, your equipment's outdated, and every decent worker you had is either here or gone." Silence. "We're trying to avoid bankruptcy," my brother finally said. "We were hoping maybe you'd consider helping us out." That's when I smiled. A slow, steady, not-so-nice smile. "Help how?" My dad straightened up like he rehearsed this. "We're willing to offer you a share of the company. Real partnership. Even controlling interest if you want." My jaw tightened. Not because I was angry, but because I was holding back a laugh. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You're offering me control over a business that's weeks away from being shut down. That's being investigated for fraud. That's hemorrhaging clients. And now, after everything, you want to hand me the wheel and act like it's a gift?" My brother squirmed in his chair. "You're our only shot," he muttered. I let that hang for a second. "You remember what you said to me?" I asked my dad. "When I asked for a stake in the company a year ago?" He looked down. "You said I'd get something after you died," I said. "So what's changed? You still alive, right?" "Don't be petty," my dad snapped, finally showing some fire. "This is serious. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out over the parking lot, the clean lines, the organized crew working below. My operation, my rules. You called me selfish, I said quietly. Told me I wasn't leadership material. You gave the golden child the kingdom and told me to sweep the floors. You treated me like a backup plan, and now that the plan failed, you come running to the guy you ignored? No one responded. I turned back to them. My dad's face was red now. My brother looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. You two made this mess, I said. And now you're asking the guy you discarded to fix it. You don't have to fix it, my brother said quickly. We just need help stabilizing. A loan, maybe a temporary contract, or just referrals. I held up a hand. Stop. They both shut up. You came here hoping I'd save you. And I could. I have the money, the resources, the network. I could throw you a line and maybe you'd stay afloat. Their eyes lit up for a second. But I won't. Their faces dropped like bricks. You don't deserve it, I said. You didn't just push me out. You tried to erase me. Then when everything fell apart, you blamed me. Like some bitter Hail Mary. You tried to destroy me, and now you want me to rebuild you? I stepped forward, hands in my pockets. You want a clean slate? Get in line. That's not how it works anymore. You burned that bridge with gasoline and danced on the ashes. My dad opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. I didn't build this place to throw lifelines to people who buried me. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared them down. You can leave now. They sat there for a second, stunned. Then they stood up slowly. No fight, no argument, just shame. My brother looked at me one last time. You really won't help us? I stared right at him. I did help, I said, by leaving. And with that, they walked out. No handshake, no goodbye. Just the soft click of the glass door closing behind them. I sat there for a while after. Not thinking, not celebrating, just sitting. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about finally being in a place where I didn't need them to acknowledge my worth, because I built something without them. And that's what killed them most. The black sheep had become the wolf. And now, I run the damn pack. This story is titled, They Claimed I Wasn't Their Dad, so I stopped acting like one, took my truck and left, but now they're desperate to get me back. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Alright Reddit, never thought I'd be typing this out, but after spending the last 3 hours reading posts about stepdads getting screwed over, I figured maybe sharing my story might help some other poor bastard avoid the shit show I went through. Warning, this is going to be long AF and probably full of typos, because I'm running on zero sleep and typing this on my phone in my truck. I'm 41, male now. Been driving trucks since I was 23. Started with nothing but a CDL and a dream of owning my own rig someday. Worked my ass off, lived in that truck, saved every penny until I could buy my own Peterbilt. Was doing pretty good too. Had my own route, regular customers, even started building a decent savings. No wife, no kids, just me and my dog living the dream on the open road. Wasn't exactly killing it, but I had my shit together, you know? Owned my truck outright, had a small apartment I barely used, and enough extra cash to treat myself to a good steak dinner when I felt like it. Not bad for a guy who grew up in a trailer park with nothing. First off, you gotta understand how this whole mess started. It was 2015, and I was at PetSmart buying food for my German Shepherd, Ghost. Normal Thursday afternoon, nothing special. Ghost was this big goofball I'd rescued a year before. Best decision I ever made, but that's pretty much the only good decision in this story, lol. So I'm there comparing prices on dog food, shit's expensive, right? When this kid literally slams into my legs at full speed. I mean, this little dude was booking it. Ghost, being the gentle giant he is, just starts wagging his tail like crazy. This kid, Liam, was like 4 or 5, all energy and no brakes. You know the type. He's wearing this Spider-Man t-shirt that's seen better days, and has this toy car clutched in his hand that he apparently thought could outrun my dog. Behind him comes this woman looking absolutely done with life, pushing a stroller with a baby in it. That was Mia and little Amy. Mia looked like one of those moms you see in movies who's trying to hold it together, but is one spilled sippy cup away from losing it. Dark circles under her eyes, messy bun, the whole attitude. I help Liam up. Kid's still giggling because Ghost is giving him the world's sloppiest kisses, and Mia starts apologizing like crazy. I'm so sorry, he's just so hyper today. Liam apologized to the nice man, etc., etc. But I'm just laughing because honestly, it was the most excitement I'd had all week. Being a trucker means a lot of lonely hours on the road, so random kid attacks are actually a nice change of pace, LMAO. Turns out they were there because Liam was begging for a pet snake. Hell no, according to Mia. And Amy needed to look at the fishies, or she wouldn't nap. We got to talking. You know how it goes, making small talk while a hyperactive kid tries to convince your dog to be his new best friend. That's when I noticed her Marine Corps widow pin on her purse. Didn't say anything about it at first, but man, it explained a lot. Found out later her husband James died in Afghanistan about a year before. Real hero type. Bronze Star, the whole deal. Left behind a 4-year-old boy who could barely remember him, and a baby girl who'd never know him. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I didn't notice Mia was pretty. She was, but that's not what got me. It was watching her try so damn hard to keep it together. Like when Liam asked if the snake could sleep in Daddy's old room, and her voice cracked just a tiny bit when she said no. Or how she was counting out exact change for dog treats, because you could tell money was tight. Ghost sealed the deal, honestly. This dog, who usually takes forever to warm up to people, was letting Liam climb all over him like a jungle gym. Even little Amy in her stroller was giggling every time Ghost would gently lick her hand. Mia joked that it was the first time she'd seen Amy smile at a stranger in months. I did something stupid then. Offered to let them walk Ghost with me around the store, while we looked at pets they definitely weren't getting. Mia was firm on the no-snake rule, and honestly, good call. Liam was over the moon, holding Ghost's leash, with me right there, obviously, and Mia actually relaxed a little. We ended up exchanging numbers. For doggy playdates, she said, half joking, but I think we both knew what was up. Looking back now, sitting in my truck with Ghost's gray muzzle on my lap, I wonder if he knew. That dog always was smarter than me. He loved those kids right away, but every time Mia came around, he'd get this look. Not growling, nothing aggressive, just watchful. Should have paid more attention to that. But you know what they say about hindsight being 20/20 and all that bullshit. Guess your dog can't protect you from your own stupid decisions, even if he tries. Anyway, those first few months after meeting Mia were, man, I don't even know how to describe them. Started with those doggy playdates we talked about. I'd bring Ghost to this little park near their apartment complex, and Liam would literally vibrate with excitement every time he saw us pull up in my truck. Kid loved that truck BTW. Thought it was the coolest thing ever that I drove a monster truck. It's just a regular Peterbilt, but try telling that to a 4-year-old LOL. Here's where I made my first mistake. Started adjusting my routes to be home more. Any trucker reading this knows that's basically throwing money away. But there I was, turning down good long-haul jobs to take local routes so I could be around for stuff like Liam's t-ball games and Amy's doctor appointments. Mia was struggling bad with money. Never asked directly for help, but you could see it. Apartment was always freezing in winter because she was saving on heat. Kids wearing clothes that were a bit too small. One time I noticed Liam's shoes were literally held together with duct tape. So yeah, I stepped in. What else was I gonna do? Bought Liam new shoes. Kid cried when I got him light-up ones. Fucking broke my heart. Started accidentally bringing over extra groceries. That kind of thing. Mia tried to refuse at first, but you try saying no when your kid's jumping around in his first new shoes in months. Got serious pretty quick after that. Started staying over more and more. Ghost loved it. Dog had 2 kids to play with and a bigger space to roam. I'd come back from shorter runs, and they'd all be there waiting. Even Amy started warming up to me. Went from crying whenever I got near her to demanding bedtime stories. First time Liam called me dad, I was under my truck doing maintenance. Kid was watching me work, handing me tools. Wrong ones usually, but hey, he was trying. Dropped a wrench on my finger and swore. He giggled and said, "Dad, you said a bad word, just casual, like he'd been calling me that forever." I played it cool, but man, inside I was a mess. Good mess, you know? Went out that weekend and bought one of those world's best dad mugs. Dumb, right? Still have it in my truck. Can't bring myself to throw it out. Mia and I got married about a year after meeting. Nothing fancy. Courthouse wedding because I had a delivery that afternoon. She didn't want a big thing anyway. Said her first wedding had been enough of a production. But I was too busy playing Superman to notice. Got a bigger place. Nice house with a yard for Ghost and the kids. Started a college fund for both kids. Separate accounts under my name, thank God. Worked my ass off to provide everything they needed, and most of what they wanted. You know what's funny? Other truckers used to give me shit about being whipped. Missing out on the good routes, rushing home for dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences. But I was proud of it. Proud that Amy would FaceTime me to show off her art projects. Proud that Liam wanted me to teach him about engines. Proud when other parents at school events would say what a great dad I was. Ghost was living his best life too. Had his own spot on the couch, that Mia hated but tolerated, followed the kids everywhere, even had playdates with the neighbors' dogs. But he never quite warmed up to Mia. Wouldn't growl or anything, just kept his distance. Wouldn't take treats from her. Wouldn't cuddle with her like he did with the kids. Should have paid attention to that. I started noticing little things about Mia too. How she'd introduce me as the kid's stepdad instead of her husband. How she kept a picture of James, her late husband, on her nightstand, but wouldn't put up any photos of our wedding. How she'd talk about James to anyone who'd listen, brave Marine, hero, perfect father, but would change the subject if anyone asked what I did for work. But hey, the kids seemed happy, house was paid for, and I had what I thought was a family. Ghost had his humans. I had my ready-made family. Life was good. Now, remember how I said Liam was this sweet kid who thought my truck was the coolest thing ever? Yeah, well, teenagers are a whole different ballgame. When he hit 17, it's like first time I noticed something was really wrong was when I got back from a 3-day run. I'd busted my ass to make it home for his football game, even turned down a better paying route to be there. Walk in the door, Ghost running to greet me like always, and I hear Liam talking to his friends in the kitchen. Nah, my real dad was a Marine. Won a Bronze Star and everything. This guy's just my mom's husband. I felt like someone slapped me on the face. This was the same kid who used to beg me to take him to the truck yard, who'd sit in my rig for hours while I taught him about engines. Now suddenly I'm just my mom's husband? But it got worse. Amy, 14 by then, started copying everything her brother did. Eye rolls, heavy sighs whenever I walked into a room, the works. One time I asked her to clean up her mess in the kitchen. You'd think I'd asked her to donate a kidney or something. Why should I? You're not my real dad. There it was. That fucking phrase. Started hearing it more and more. Every time I tried to set any kind of rules or boundaries, you're not my real dad. Every time I tried to help with homework or give advice, you're not my real dad. I started to feel like it was their new favorite song or something. And Mia, she just checked out. Always on her phone, always too busy to deal with it. One time I actually heard her on the phone with her friend, laughing about how the kids were just going through a phase and how they obviously missed their real father. Real father? They don't even remember him. Like I hadn't been the one there for every fucking thing for the past 8 years. The worst part? I started noticing how Mia would talk about me to her friends. Oh, he's on the road a lot. Or he drives trucks, always said in this apologetic tone, like she was embarrassed. Meanwhile, she'd talk about James, dead husband, like he hung the moon. James was a war hero, and James would have wanted this and that. Even started affecting my relationship with Ghost. Used to be, he'd sleep in the kids' room sometimes. They'd fight over who got him each night. Now they'd push him away, say their friends were coming over, and they didn't want dog hair everywhere. Only time they paid attention to him was when they needed something from me. Amazing how they'd suddenly become dog lovers when they wanted money or favors. But then, I started finding out about all these family things I wasn't invited to. Mia's family reunions, school events, even just dinners out. They'd wait until I was on a run, then go do family stuff without me. Would see the pictures on Mia's Facebook later, them all smiling, having fun, being a real family while I was out earning the money that paid for it all. One night I confronted Mia about it. She just looked at me with this pity, like I was some dumb truck driver who didn't understand how things worked. They're teenagers, they need space. And you're gone so much anyway. Yeah, gone busting my ass to pay for their private school, their phones, their cars, because apparently my truck wasn't good enough for them to be seen in anymore. Gone working extra routes to afford the lifestyle they'd gotten used to. It was like watching something rot from the inside out. On the surface, everything looked fine. Nice house, nice cars, kids in good schools. But underneath, it was all going to shit. Ghost knew. He'd started doing this thing where he'd put his head on my lap whenever I was home, just staring at me with those knowing dog eyes, like he was trying to tell me something. But I wasn't ready to listen yet. But then, things went from bad to worse. Like, my tools would go missing from the garage. Not just misplaced, straight up gone. Liam used to help me maintain my truck. Knew exactly which tools I needed most. Funny how those were always the ones that disappeared. Then my truck started having issues. Nothing major at first. Scratch here, dent there. Could have been anything, right? But then one morning, I came out to find my fuel tank cap unscrewed. Not loose, completely unscrewed and sitting on top. Anyone who knows trucks knows how dangerous that could have been if I hadn't caught it. So I installed a security camera in the yard after that. Guess what I saw on the footage? Our precious boy Liam, 2 a.m., messing with my truck. When I showed Mia the video, you know what she said? Well, maybe if you were home more, he wouldn't act out like this. Yeah, that's when I started keeping receipts for everything. Every repair, every replacement tool, every single thing I paid for. My lawyer says that turned out to be the smartest thing I could have done. But here's where it really went sideways. Amy, my little girl who used to beg for bedtime stories, she started dating this college guy. Tim or Tom or whatever. Real piece of work. Trust fund baby type who drove a BMW his daddy bought him. Didn't think much of it at first. Not my business who she dates, right? Then I noticed she's not wearing the necklace I got her for her 16th birthday anymore. The one she swore she'd never take off. Found out later she told her friends it was embarrassing because it came from a truck stop. It was from Tiffany's, by the way. Worked overtime for 2 months to afford it. One night, I'm at home between routes, and I hear Amy and Mia talking in the kitchen. Amy's going on about how Tom's family has this big Christmas party coming up. Really fancy affair. Mom, what do I tell them about Dad? My ears perk up, thinking maybe, just maybe, she's worried about explaining her stepdad's job. Nope. Just tell them what I always do, honey. That your father was a Marine who died serving his country. Didn't even lower their voices. Didn't care if I heard. I was sitting right there in the living room with Ghost, and they just acted like I didn't exist. Ghost growled. First time I'd ever heard him growl at family. Mia jumped, tried to play it off with a laugh. Oh, that dog's getting so moody in his old age. Nah, Mia. Ghost just finally stopped pretending, same as me. But the final straw is when I found out they had a whole-ass Thanksgiving dinner while I was on a run. Not just them, Mia's whole family, some of the kids' friends, even a few neighbors. Saw the pictures on Facebook. They'd set up in my backyard, used my grill, that I hadn't been allowed to use in months because the smoke bothers Amy's allergies, and acted like one big happy family. And the caption under the photo said, "So thankful for family. Missing James extra hard today. I was out there driving through a fucking snowstorm to deliver emergency supplies, missing my family, and they're playing house pretending I don't exist. I had enough that night, sleeping in my truck with Ghost. Didn't even bother going inside when I got home. I started making plans. Called my buddy Rich, who's a lawyer. Started gathering documents. Took screenshots of everything, but I still wasn't ready to pull the trigger. Still thought maybe there was something worth saving. What a fucking idiot I was. But you know what's funny about life? Just when you think things can't get more fucked up, the universe finds a way to prove you wrong. That day started normal enough. Just finishing up a long haul from California, looking forward to surprising Amy for her 21st birthday. Didn't know I was the one in for a surprise. So I was pushing through because Amy's birthday was coming up, and even though things were shit, I still wanted to be there. Had this whole thing planned, was gonna surprise her, had a Tiffany bracelet I'd been saving up for months to buy her, got home early for once. It's like 6 p.m., sun's still up. I see all these cars parked around our house. Nice ones, BMWs, Mercedes, that kind of shit. Figured maybe Mia was having one of her fancy friend gatherings she never invited me to. Ghost starts acting weird the moment we pull up. Normally he's excited to get home, but this time he's just tense. Should have listened to him right then and there. I go around back because that's where all the noise is coming from. And there it is. Full-blown party in my backyard. Catering, fancy dresses, the works. And right in the middle of it all is Amy, holding hands with Trust Fund Tom. It was a whole engagement party that they didn't tell me about. But here's the thing that really got me. I'm standing there, gift box in my hand, and I hear this old lady, Tom's grandmother found out later, asking about Amy's family. Oh, what does your father do, dear? Now, I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, after all these years, Amy might acknowledge me. Shit, even my stepdad's a truck driver would have been something. Amy, wearing this fancy designer dress that I know Mia couldn't afford, looks this old lady right in the eye and says, "My father was a Marine. He died in Afghanistan when I was a baby. He was a hero." Mia's standing right there, nodding along, proud as can be. And then she adds, James would be so proud of the woman Amy's become. He always wanted her to marry well. Marry well. Like being a working man who provided for their family for 15 years wasn't well enough. Then Tom's dad starts talking about the wedding plans. Big church wedding, country club reception, all that fancy shit. Then he says something about father of the bride traditions. Amy doesn't even hesitate. Oh, my Uncle Steve, Mia's brother, will be standing in for my dad. He was my dad's best friend in the Marines. Fucking Steve, who I've literally never seen contribute a damn thing to Amy's life except showing up drunk to Christmas and telling war stories about James. I must have made some kind of noise because Ghost lets out this low whine. That's when they finally notice me standing there. The look on Amy's face, not shame, not guilt, just annoyance. Like I'd ruined her perfect moment by existing. Mia tries to play it off. Oh, Jacob, you're home early. We were just... But I'm not listening anymore. I'm looking at my house, my backyard, the party being paid for with my money. Found out later Mia used my credit card for the catering. Celebrating my daughter's engagement, and I'm not even supposed to exist. The bracelet box feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds in my hand. Ghost is pressed against my leg, doing that thing where he's trying to protect me, but also comfort me at the same time. Tom's mom, trying to be polite I guess, asked who I am. Before anyone can answer, I just turn around and walk away. Get in my truck, Ghost jumps in, and we leave. Spent the night at a truck stop about 50 miles away, just sitting there with Ghost, both of us staring at nothing. That night I called Rich, my lawyer buddy, told him it's time. He just said, finally. I've had the papers ready for months. Honestly, after that engagement party bullshit, something in me just broke. Or maybe fixed itself, depending how you look at it. Spent that whole night in my truck with Ghost, going through old photos on my phone, pictures of Liam's first baseball game, Amy's dance recitals, all that family stuff I thought we had. But here's something most people don't get about trucking. It's not just some dude driving a big rig down the highway. It's a fucking business. Contracts, accounts, assets, the whole 9 yards. And while Mia and the kids were busy looking down their noses at the simple trucker, I was running that business like a goddamn CEO. That house they were living in my name. The cars they drove, my name. The credit cards Mia used to pay for that fancy engagement party, all in my name. Even the utilities were under my company's name because of some tax thing Rich set up years ago. But I played it cool, kept driving my routes, kept paying the bills, kept acting like nothing was wrong. Even sat through dinner one night where Amy and Mia were talking about wedding venues that cost more than my first truck. Just nodded along, playing the dumb trucker they thought I was. Meanwhile, Rich and I went through everything. Bank statements, property titles, credit card bills, all of it. Found some interesting shit too. Like how Mia had been writing checks to her brother Steve, you know, the stand-in dad, from my business account. Or how Liam had been using my credit card to buy parts for his car that somehow ended up on his friend's ride. The best part? Mia never signed any prenup, but she also never put her name on anything important. She thought not taking my last name meant she was keeping her independence or some shit. Actually meant she had no legal claim to my assets. Rich laughed his ass off when he realized that. You know what really gets me though? While all this is going down, they're still acting like I'm the bad guy. Liam's still messing with my truck. Caught him on camera again, trying to sugar the gas tank this time. Amy's still playing the poor, fatherless bride card to Tom's family. And Mia's still running her mouth to anyone who'll listen about how her first husband was such a hero. One night, I'm sitting in my study doing paperwork, running my own fleet now. Got 2 other drivers working for me. And I hear them in the kitchen. They're laughing about something, and Mia goes, well, at least the wedding will be paid for. It's not like he knows how to hide money. He's just a trucker. Ghost, who'd basically moved into my study with me at this point, looks up at me like, you hearing this shit, Dad? I just patted his head and kept working on transfer paperwork with Rich. What they didn't know is that I'd been moving money around for months. Legal-like, all above board. Rich made sure of that. But strategic. Setting up new accounts, redirecting business income, canceling credit cards, and creating new ones they didn't know about. Even started a whole new LLC for my growing fleet. The day everything was ready, I took Ghost for a long walk. Had to think about what I was about to do. Wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back what was mine. My dignity. My self-respect. My life. You know what finally convinced me? Saw Amy showing off her engagement ring to her friends in the backyard. Big fancy thing that probably cost more than most people make in a month. She's going on about how she's finally going to have a real family once she marries Tom. That night, I made one last call to Rich. Do it. The plan we'd spent months putting together was finally going into motion. And let me tell you something about patience. You ever watch one of those nature documentaries where a predator just waits patiently, letting their prey think everything's fine until the perfect moment to strike? That was me that Tuesday morning. Told Mia I was heading out for a 3-day run the night before. She probably thought I was off being a good little trucker, earning more money for precious Amy's wedding. Hell, Liam was probably already planning what part of my rig to fuck with next. What they didn't know? I was parked just an hour away at my buddy's yard, watching everything unfold through the security cameras I'd installed. And boy, what a show it was. The lawyer Rich timed everything perfectly. The courier showed up right as Mia was having her morning coffee. 3 thick envelopes, each one a different kind of fuck you. Should have seen her face when she opened that first package. Divorce papers. But not just any divorce papers. We're talking a whole goddamn manuscript of their bullshit. Security footage of Liam's little vandalism hobby. Bank statements showing Mia treating my business account like her personal piggy bank. Screenshots of Amy talking shit about me online while flashing the designer crap I paid for. All of it, documented and notarized. Then came the eviction notice. Mia always acted so high and mighty about keeping her independence, not taking my last name. Never once bothered to check if her name was on the house deed, though. Funny how that works out. But the cherry on top? That third envelope. Watching her face as she realized every credit card was canceled, every joint account closed, every asset transferred. All perfectly legal, all documented, all gone. Like watching someone realize they've been playing poker with a marked deck, and they just lost everything. The meltdown was biblical. First came Mia's calls, screaming about the wedding and the house and how I couldn't do this to them. Then Liam, trying to act tough about the credit cards like he had any fucking right to them after what he did to my truck. Finally, Amy. Real waterworks about her special day being ruined, how Tom's family would think they're trash. Not one word about the years I spent being her dad. Not one "I'm sorry" in sight. Mia tried running to her fancy lawyer friends, but turns out they're not so friendly when they realize their client doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. No joint accounts, no joint property, not even a claim to that overpriced furniture she loved to show off to her friends. All bought with business accounts, all mine. Then Mia's brother Steve shows up, probably thinking he's gonna play tough guy. Remember Steve? The stand-in dad for Amy's wedding? Yeah, he wasn't so tough when my lawyer's associate served him with a cease and desist and a restraining order. Turns out threatening someone who keeps receipts isn't such a smart move. By sunset, Mia's crying to anyone who'll listen, Amy's playing victim on social media, and Liam's still making threats about my truck. Thanks for the written evidence, genius. But here's the best part. I made sure everyone knew why. Rich helped me put together a nice little information package for all their fancy friends and Tom's family. Everything laid out nice and neat. The vandalism, the theft, the lies about being a grieving military family while living off my work. Even threw in some choice recordings of them mocking my job. Tom's family? Old money types, real proper. They didn't take too kindly to finding out their future in-laws were a bunch of grifters. That fancy country club wedding suddenly got fucked up. The next few days I got hundreds of messages, threats, begging, guilt trips, you name it. I didn't answer a single one. Just sat in my truck with Ghost, watching karma do its thing through my phone screen. Drove by the house a week later, moving trucks in the driveway. Guess reality's a bitch when it finally shows up. Now sitting here by the lake where Ghost and I used to take the kids fishing. Ghost's sprawling out in the grass next to my chair, probably dreaming about chasing rabbits or stealing my breakfast sandwich like he did this morning. Been a year since everything went down, and sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed. Funny thing about hitting rock bottom, once you start climbing back up, you realize maybe you needed the fall to appreciate the view. Take my business, for example. Remember those 2 drivers I mentioned? Now there's 6 of us, all running solid routes, all trucks paid for. Amazing what you can do with your money when it's not being bled dry by people who see you as an ATM with legs. Couldn't keep the old house, though. Too many ghosts, and I don't mean the 4-legged kind. Found a smaller place near my truck yard instead. Got a big fenced yard where he can run, a garage where I can work on my trucks in peace, and most importantly, no drama walking through the door every night. People keep asking me about them. Guess everyone loves a good train wreck, right? Mia ended up moving in with her hero brother Steve. Funny how his heroic spirit dried up when she actually needed help. Last I heard, she's answering phones at some dental office. Turns out, just a trucker wasn't such a bad provider after all. Liam's working at his uncle's tire shop now. College wasn't so appealing once daddy's money stopped flowing. Kind of ironic, kid who thought manual labor was beneath him is now changing tires for a living. Life's got a sense of humor, I'll give it that. And Amy? That fairy tale wedding crashed and burned. Trust fund. Tom's family had some concerns about their precious son marrying into a family with questionable values. Their words, not mine. They offered to bankroll a smaller ceremony, but Princess wouldn't have it. She's slinging plates at some chain restaurant now, living back with Mia. That Tiffany bracelet I bought for her birthday? Sold it. Got Ghost an orthopedic bed instead. Best trade I ever made. The messages still come sometimes. Mia's essays about how I destroyed the family go straight to Rich's evidence folder. Amy tried the I miss you dad routine on my birthday. Funny how that word only matters when they need something. Liam? Radio silence. Good. You know what's weird though? I don't feel anything for them anymore. No hate, no love, just nothing. But life keeps rolling. Fleet's growing. Got good people working with me who actually respect what we do. Got a date next weekend too. Owns a diner on one of my regular routes. She's got her own business, her own life, and get this. She actually thinks what I do is something to be proud of. Ghost gave her the paw of approval, which is really all the review I need. And you know what? After all this, I realized something important. Being a provider doesn't make you a father, and being a father doesn't mean being a doormat. Sometimes the family you think you're building is just a house of cards, and sometimes Ghost just dropped his ball in my lap for the 100th time. The only family you need is the one that's been lying at your feet all along. Ghost is giving me that look now, the one that says, "Enough with the heavy stuff, Dad. Let's play." Think I'll take his advice. After all, he's been right about everything else. Edit 1. Ghost says thanks for all the love. He's currently snoring in his fancy new bed, living his best life. Final edit. To everyone fighting their own battles, it gets better. Keep your dignity, document everything, and never let anyone shame you for honest work. Ghost and I have an early route tomorrow, so we're signing off. Remember, sometimes losing a fake family is worth finding yourself. My parents gave my twin brother $400,000 for his revolutionary business, while telling me to figure it out myself. The fallout after he failed. They lost everything was so sweet. All right, guys, strap in because this story is absolutely wild, and I'm still processing how perfectly everything worked out. This happened over the past 2 years, and the ending is so satisfying I had to share it with you all. Fair warning, this is going to be long, but trust me, every word is worth it for that ending. Background. I, 29 male, have a twin brother Blake, who's obviously also 29M. We grew up in Phoenix in what you'd call an upper middle class family. Dad runs a successful plumbing supply business that he built from nothing, and Mom works as a loan officer at a credit union. Not wealthy, but definitely comfortable. Nice house in the suburbs, good cars, family vacations, all that stuff. Here's where it gets interesting, though. From day one, Blake was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. I'm talking about a level of favoritism so obvious that family friends used to comment on it. Blake was the smooth talker, the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything. I was the quiet one who actually got things done but never got credit for it. The favoritism was so blatant that our extended family started making jokes about it at gatherings. "Oh, there's Blake the prince and Ryan the worker bee," my uncle would say, thinking he was being funny. My aunt would always ask about Blake's latest achievements, while barely acknowledging my presence. Even my grandparents got caught up in it. Blake got savings bonds for every birthday, while I got practical gifts like work gloves or tool sets. So 3 months ago, we're all at Sunday dinner at my parents' house like we do every week. Blake shows up with this huge grin and his girlfriend Emma practically bouncing with excitement. Emma, by the way, is the definition of a gold digger who's been working on Blake for 2 years to think bigger and stop settling for employee life. Blake stands up like he's about to give some grand speech. Family, I have huge news. I'm starting my own business, and it's going to revolutionize the home improvement industry. My dad immediately perks up because anything Blake does is automatically amazing in his eyes. Tell us more, son. Blake launches into this presentation about his game-changing business idea. He wants to start a luxury home renovation company that specializes in high-end sustainable upgrades for wealthy homeowners. His pitch was basically that rich people want expensive, eco-friendly renovations but don't know how to find quality contractors who can handle luxury projects. He had this whole speech prepared about market gaps and untapped demographics, and how he was going to disrupt the traditional contracting model. The guy was using buzzwords he'd obviously learned from watching YouTube videos about entrepreneurship. Emma was nodding along like he was delivering the Gettysburg Address, occasionally adding helpful comments like, "Blake has such vision, and this is exactly what the market needs." What really got me was how prepared this whole presentation was. Blake had clearly practiced this pitch multiple times, probably with Emma coaching him on what to say. He had talking points about target demographics, profit margins, and growth potential, all complete nonsense, but delivered with the confidence of someone who actually knew what they were talking about. I'm sitting there thinking this sounds like every other home renovation company, but with fancier marketing. But my parents? They're acting like Blake just invented electricity. "This is incredible, Blake," my mom gushes. "You're going to transform people's homes and help the environment." Then Blake drops the bomb. The best part is, Mom and Dad have agreed to fund the startup. They're investing $400,000 to get Blake Home Innovations off the ground. I nearly choked on my food. $400,000 for a business idea that was basically renovations but expensive. My dad turns to me with this proud smile. We're investing in Blake's future, Ryan. This is his chance to build something really special. Now, here's the thing that made my blood boil. 18 months ago, I had approached them about starting my own general contracting business. I had spent months preparing a detailed business plan. I had lined up 3 major clients ready to sign contracts. I had researched equipment costs and labor needs, and I had even secured preliminary quotes from suppliers. You know what my parents told me? Ryan, you've always been resourceful and independent. You're smart enough to figure this out on your own. Blake needs more support than you do. That word, independent, like it was some kind of character flaw that I could handle my own problems. The difference between Blake's idea and mine? I wanted to start a legitimate general contracting business, focusing on middle-class home improvements and small commercial projects. I had real clients, real contracts, and a realistic plan to be profitable within 6 months. Blake had a fancy name and a vague idea about targeting rich people, but Blake was getting $400,000 handed to him, while I was told to figure it out myself. To understand how messed up this family dynamic is, I need to give you the full background because this favoritism started when we were literally babies. Blake came out first, I followed 4 minutes later. According to family stories, Blake cried loudly and demanded attention, while I was quiet and looked around taking everything in. My parents always said this set the tone for our personalities, and apparently their parenting approach too. Growing up, Blake was the outgoing kid who made friends easily and played sports. I was more reserved, preferred working with my hands, and learned practical skills from my carpenter grandfather. Guess which approach our parents celebrated? Every single baseball game Blake played, and he was average at best. My parents were there with coolers, foam fingers, and professional cameras, acting like he was heading to the major leagues. When I won first place at the regional woodworking competition in high school, they missed the ceremony because Blake had a tournament the same weekend. The woodworking competition was actually huge. I'd spent 6 months crafting an intricate oak bookshelf with hand-cut dovetail joints and custom brass hardware. The judges were blown away. I got a trophy, a $500 scholarship, and my project was featured in the local newspaper. My parents' response? That's great, honey. Did Blake's team win their game? Meanwhile, Blake's baseball achievements were treated like national news. Base hit in a meaningless game? Dad called his friends to brag. Made varsity as a sophomore because half the seniors graduated early? Mom threw a celebration dinner for the extended family. In high school, Blake wanted to take his girlfriend to prom in style, so Dad rented him a limousine and bought an expensive tuxedo. When I wanted to buy tools to start doing small carpentry jobs to earn money, I had to save up for my part-time job because it builds character to work for what you want. College was more of the same pattern. Blake struggled with his business classes, hovering around a 2.5 GPA and needing constant tutoring. Guess who paid for that? When he almost got kicked out for academic probation junior year, my parents hired him a team of tutors at $40 per hour. They spent over $8,000 that semester alone. Meanwhile, I maintained a 3.6 GPA while working 25 hours a week at a construction supply company. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row, they said, "We expect nothing less from someone as capable as you." No celebration dinner, no proud phone calls, just expectations. The summer before senior year, Blake wanted an unpaid internship at some California startup because it would look good on his resume. My parents paid for his San Francisco apartment for 3 months, probably $15,000 total. Blake spent that summer posting Instagram photos from trendy restaurants, learning nothing about actual business. That same summer, I worked full-time for a commercial contractor, gaining real experience in project management, cost estimation, and client relations. But because I was earning money instead of costing money, my parents saw it as less valuable than Blake's expensive California adventure. After college, Blake bounced between jobs for 3 years, getting fired from 4 different companies for poor performance and attendance. Each time, he'd move back home while my parents supported him emotionally and financially. Marketing agency? Too corporate. Real estate company? Unrealistic expectations. High-end furniture store where he got caught sleeping in the break room? Beneath his skill level. The worst part was watching Blake become more entitled with each bailout. Emma encouraged this attitude constantly, telling him he was too talented for traditional employment and destined for greatness. When I graduated and got hired making $45,000 at a construction company, they barely acknowledged it. I was learning the business from experienced contractors, but my parents were so focused on Blake's career journey that steady employment seemed boring and unremarkable. Meanwhile, I had been working construction for 6 years, developing relationships with suppliers, subcontractors, and clients. I had hands-on experience with every aspect of the business. But none of that mattered because I was the independent one who didn't need help. The week after the big announcement, I asked Blake if I could look at his business plan. Just curiosity about this revolutionary idea worth $400,000. It's still being refined, he said, but the concept is rock solid. Red flag number 1. I pushed for more details. What's your target market analysis? How many potential clients have you identified in the Phoenix area? Blake got this confused look he always got when someone asked for specifics. Well, there are tons of wealthy people here who want nice renovations. It's a huge market. That's not market analysis. That's just stating obvious facts. Over the next month, I watched this disaster unfold in slow motion. Blake had no real business plan, no client base, no partnerships with suppliers, no understanding of construction licensing requirements, no insurance plan, and no realistic timeline for profitability. I tried asking him basic questions that any legitimate contractor would be able to answer. What's your average project timeline? He didn't know. How do you calculate labor costs? He had no system. What's your markup on materials? He'd never thought about it. How do you handle permit applications? He didn't even know permits were required for most renovation work. The licensing situation was particularly ridiculous. In Arizona, you need a contractor's license for any project over $1,000, which requires passing examinations on building codes, safety regulations, and business practices. Blake hadn't even looked into the licensing process. When I mentioned this to him, he waved it off saying he'd figure that out later, and that licensing was probably just bureaucratic red tape anyway. Even more concerning was his complete lack of understanding about insurance and liability. Construction work involves significant risks, and any legitimate contractor needs comprehensive liability insurance, workers' compensation coverage, and bonding. Blake had no idea these things existed, let alone how much they cost or how to obtain them. When I explained that insurance alone would probably cost $15,000 to $20,000 per year for his type of operation, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. What he did have was a logo that Emma designed using some online tool and a 2-page business overview that looked like a high school project. The logo was this generic house icon with some swooshy green elements that were supposed to represent sustainability. The business overview was full of meaningless buzzwords about synergistic solutions and paradigm-shifting approaches, but contained zero actual information about operations, pricing, or target markets. But my parents were already writing checks. We've opened a business account for Blake, my dad announced at the next family dinner. The first $150,000 is already deposited to get things started. I was stunned. Dad, have you seen actual financial projections? Like real numbers showing how this business will make money? My mom jumped in with, Ryan, not everyone needs to analyze everything to death like you do. Sometimes you have to trust someone's entrepreneurial instincts. Entrepreneurial instincts, right? Meanwhile, I had been working overtime and saving every penny to fund my own business. I had $35,000 saved up and was still $20,000 short of what I needed to buy equipment and cover initial expenses. I could have launched my contracting business and been profitable within months, but I was doing it the independent way while Blake got handed everything. The situation got even more ridiculous when Emma started posting on social media about being an entrepreneur's girlfriend and how excited she was to be disrupting the home improvement industry. She created an Instagram account documenting their business journey with staged photos of Blake pretending to review blueprints at coffee shops. Emma's Instagram posts were absolutely cringeworthy. She'd post photos of Blake sitting at Starbucks with his laptop open, captioned with things like, "My CEO grinding away on revolutionary business strategies." The blueprints in these photos were actually just printouts of generic house plans Blake had downloaded from free websites. She also started a business blog where she wrote weekly posts about the entrepreneur lifestyle and gave advice about supporting your partner's business vision. Emma had zero experience in business or construction, but she was positioning herself as some kind of expert advisor. The most ridiculous part was when Emma started selling business mindset coaching sessions through her Instagram, charging $150 for 1-hour phone calls, where she'd supposedly help women unlock their partner's potential. The fact that people actually paid for this showed how good Emma was at selling fantasy. Meanwhile, Blake was eating up all this attention and validation. He genuinely believed that Emma's social media hype was evidence of his business success. He'd show our parents Emma's posts as proof that he was building something significant, and they'd nod approvingly at the professional marketing approach and brand building strategies. It was embarrassing to watch, but my parents thought it showed great business mindset and brand building. 4 months after the initial funding, Blake's business was already falling apart, but you'd never know it from listening to him at family dinners. "How's the client acquisition going?" I'd ask, already knowing the answer. "Really well," Blake would say confidently. "We're in final negotiations with several high-value prospects." Complete nonsense. I knew he hadn't landed a single client because he'd asked me to look at some project estimates he was putting together. The estimates were wildly unrealistic, either way too high or way too low, and showed he had no understanding of actual construction costs. Emma was pushing Blake to spend more money on business development and market positioning. They'd blown through $80,000 on completely unnecessary expenses, like a fancy office space in an upscale area, new vehicles with custom wrapping, expensive marketing materials, and networking events that were basically just expensive dinners. My parents remained completely oblivious because Blake was feeding them updates about promising meetings and potential partnerships. Anytime I asked specific questions, Blake would deflect or Emma would claim the details were confidential for competitive reasons. Meanwhile, my own plan was moving forward slowly but steadily. I had finally saved enough to buy a work truck and basic equipment. I was taking on small projects during weekends and evenings, building a client base and reputation. I had 3 customers lined up for major projects once I could go full-time. But every time I mentioned my progress to my parents, they'd brush it off with comments like, "That's nice, Ryan," before immediately asking Blake about his latest business developments. The cognitive dissonance was incredible. Things reached a breaking point during Christmas dinner. Blake and Emma showed up wearing expensive new clothes and talking about how exciting everything was and how they were about to land some major contracts. Blake was wearing a $400 designer sweater and new Italian leather shoes that probably cost $300. Emma had on a dress that I recognized from a high-end boutique where nothing costs less than $200. They were both carrying the latest iPhones and Apple Watches, and Emma was sporting a new designer handbag that I'd seen in a magazine for $800. All of this purchased with our parents' startup funding, of course. The conversation at dinner was nauseating. Blake kept dropping hints about big meetings and exciting developments without providing any specific details. Emma would chime in with comments about how proud she was of Blake's vision and leadership, and how they were building something that would change everything. "Who are these potential clients?" I asked. Blake got that panicked look again. "Well, we're working with several property developers." "Which developers?" "I can't really say because of confidentiality agreements." This was obviously nonsense. Blake didn't have any confidentiality agreements because he didn't have any real clients. He was making vague references to developers because it sounded impressive, but he couldn't name anyone specific because the meetings didn't actually exist. Emma jumped in. "Ryan, why are you being so negative? Can't you just support your brother's success?" The word success, coming from Emma, was particularly galling. She was defining success as spending other people's money on fancy offices and designer clothes, rather than actually completing projects or generating revenue. In Emma's world, looking successful was the same as being successful, and Blake was buying into this delusion completely. Success? What success? You've burned through $200,000 and haven't completed a single project. That's when my mom dropped another bomb. Actually, Blake needs additional funding to really scale the business. We've agreed to provide another $200,000 to expand operations. The casual way she announced this, like it was a small favor rather than a massive financial commitment, showed how completely disconnected my parents were from reality. They were talking about $200,000 like it was lunch money, even though this amount represented years of savings and a significant portion of their retirement security. I put down my fork. "You're giving him another $200,000? It's an investment in his future," my dad said defensively. "He's building something that could be worth millions." "Based on what evidence? Has he shown you any completed projects? Any satisfied customers? Any revenue at all?" Silence around the table. "Have you seen proof that he spent the first $200,000 on actual business expenses?" More silence. My dad's face was getting red. "Ryan, Blake doesn't need to justify every business decision to you. We believe in his vision." That's when I lost my temper. His vision? The guy who's never successfully completed anything in his life? The guy who got fired from 4 jobs? The guy who needed tutoring to pass basic business classes? That vision? Emma started fake crying about how I was being cruel and unsupportive. Blake was accusing me of being jealous and unable to handle his success. I stood up from the table. You want to know what's really messed up about this situation? 18 months ago, I came to you with a detailed business plan, realistic financial projections, actual clients ready to sign contracts, and 6 years of industry experience. You told me to figure it out myself because I was independent. Now Blake shows up with a fancy logo and some vague ideas about targeting rich people, and you're ready to give him $400,000. That's different, my mom said weakly. How is it different? Blake needs more guidance and support. No, Blake needs accountability. But you've never required that from him, so now he thinks he can just coast through life while other people pay for his mistakes. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Don't call me when this whole thing collapses. Because it will. I didn't speak to my family for 3 months after that Christmas dinner, but I didn't need to talk to them to know how things were going with Blake's business. My buddy who works in commercial construction texted me in March. Hey, isn't your brother the guy trying to start that high-end renovation company? Word around town is he's burned through a ton of money and never finished a single project. Around the same time, my own business was taking off. I had officially launched Ryan's General Contracting and was booked solid for the next 4 months. I was pulling in $25,000 per month and growing steadily. I had moved into a nice apartment and bought a reliable work truck with my own money. The best part? I hadn't told my family any of this. As far as they knew, I was still working for someone else and struggling to get my business off the ground. In April, Blake finally called me. Hey Ryan, can we talk? His voice sounded completely defeated. What's up? Listen, I know we haven't talked since Christmas, but Emma and I broke up. Of course they did. I'm sure that had nothing to do with the money running out. Sorry to hear that, I lied. And the business? Well, we're restructuring. Restructuring. That's business speak for we failed but don't want to admit it. What happened? It turns out the luxury renovation market is more complicated than we initially thought. There were licensing issues we didn't anticipate, and the startup costs were higher than projected. Translation? We blew through $400,000 and never completed a single paying project. So what's your plan now? Well, that's why I'm calling. I was hoping we could meet up and talk. I have some ideas about maybe working together on your construction stuff. I almost laughed. Now he wanted to work with me? After spending 2 years acting like my business plans were some small-time hobby? I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. 2 weeks later, my dad called. This was unusual because my dad never called unless someone was in the hospital or he needed something urgent. Ryan, we need to have a serious conversation. About what? It's about Blake and about our financial situation. There it was. What about your finances? Son, your mother and I made some serious mistakes. We gave Blake too much money too quickly, and he wasn't prepared to handle that kind of responsibility. This was the closest thing to admitting fault I'd ever heard from my father. How bad is it? Long pause. Ryan, how bad is it? All of it. The entire $400,000 is gone, plus another $75,000 we borrowed against the house, when Blake said he just needed a little more to turn things around. $475,000. Gone. No completed projects, no revenue, no assets to show for it. Just gone. Ryan, we need your help. And there it was. The real reason for the call. What kind of help? We're in serious financial trouble. Your mother's job doesn't pay enough to cover our mortgage payments. And I had to take a loan against my business inventory to fund Blake's startup. If we can't make these payments, we could lose everything. I let that sink in. My parents had borrowed against their house and dad's business, the business that supported their entire lifestyle, to fund Blake's fantasy renovation company. How much do you owe total? Around $350,000 in various loans and credit lines. If we can't get help, we'll lose the house, and I might have to sell the business. Everything. The house I grew up in, Dad's business that he'd spent 20 years building, their retirement security. All of it gambled away on Blake's ridiculous business idea. Ryan, I know we haven't always treated you fairly. I know we favored Blake, and I know we should have supported your business when you asked. But you're our son, and we heard you're doing well now, and we desperately need help. How did he know I was doing well? I hadn't told them anything about my success. I've been asking around about your contracting business, he continued. People in the industry say you're making good money and getting great reviews, that you're booked solid for months. So now that Blake had failed spectacularly and I was successful, suddenly they were interested in what I was doing. Dad, let me ask you something. If Blake's business had succeeded and he was making tons of money right now, would you be calling me for help? Silence. Or would you be calling Blake? More silence. Ryan, please. We're family. Family. Where was that family loyalty when I was working overtime to save money for my business while they handed Blake everything he wanted? I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. But I had already made my decision. I didn't call them back for 3 weeks. During that time, my business hit a major milestone. I had signed contracts worth $200,000 over the next 6 months and hired 2 full-time employees. I was officially more successful than Blake had ever dreamed of being. I also did some research into their financial situation. Through some industry contacts and public records, I found out exactly how desperate things were. They had mortgaged their house to the maximum. Dad's business was leveraged to the breaking point, and they were about 2 months away from defaulting on multiple loans. Finally, I arranged to meet them at a restaurant to discuss their proposal. I chose an upscale place that I knew they couldn't really afford anymore, but would feel obligated to suggest splitting the bill. The restaurant was one of those trendy steakhouses where appetizers start at $20 and entrees are $40 to $50. I picked it deliberately because I wanted them to feel the financial pressure of their situation while we discussed their request for help. It was petty, but after years of being treated like the responsible one who didn't deserve support, I was ready to be a little petty. When they walked in, I could see the stress on their faces. Dad looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past few months. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and he had that defeated posture that comes from carrying too much financial pressure. Mom was wearing an old dress I remembered from years ago, instead of the designer clothes she usually preferred. The designer handbags and expensive jewelry she used to flaunt were nowhere to be seen. Blake wasn't even with them. Apparently, he was too embarrassed to face me. According to my parents, he was exploring other opportunities and didn't want to complicate the family discussion. Translation: he was hiding in their basement, probably playing video games and letting our parents clean up his mess while he avoided responsibility. Thanks for meeting with us, my mom said as they sat down. Of course, family is important, I said, letting that word hang in the air. We ordered food and made small talk for a few minutes before Dad finally got to the point. I could see how uncomfortable he was having to ask his son for money. This was a man who had built a successful business from nothing, who had always been the provider and decision-maker in our family, now reduced to begging for financial help from the kid he'd consistently dismissed and overlooked. Ryan, we know we messed up badly. We know we treated you unfairly for years, and we know we made terrible decisions with Blake's business. This was the first time I'd ever heard my father admit to making mistakes with Blake. For 29 years, every decision involving Blake had been justified as supporting his potential or investing in his future. Hearing Dad finally acknowledge that these decisions were actually mistakes was incredibly satisfying. Go on. We're desperate. If we can't get help in the next month, we'll lose the house. I'll have to sell the business for whatever I can get, which won't be much given the debt load. I nodded sympathetically. That sounds really stressful. We were hoping you might be able to help us financially. Even a loan would make a huge difference. There it was. The ask. How much were you thinking? My dad looked relieved that I was even considering it. If you could loan us $100,000, that would give us breathing room to restructure the other debts and save the house. $100,000. Less than a quarter of what they'd given Blake, but still a massive amount. That's a lot of money, I said. We know, but your business is doing so well now. And we'd pay you back with interest, of course. I took a bite of my steak and thought about it theatrically. You know, I've been thinking a lot about family dynamics lately, about how different children get treated differently based on their parents' perceptions. They looked confused by the direction of the conversation. For example, some kids are seen as naturally gifted and deserving of investment and support. Other kids are seen as self-sufficient and expected to figure things out on their own. Understanding started dawning on their faces. The thing is, when you treat kids differently like that, you teach them different lessons. The kid who gets everything handed to him learns that success should come easily and that other people will always bail him out. The kid who has to earn everything learns to be self-reliant and resourceful. Ryan, my mom started. Let me finish. So here's the situation. You invested $475,000 in Blake's business based on nothing but his charm and Emma's encouragement. You never asked for a real business plan, you never required him to prove concept, and you never held him accountable for results. They were both staring at their plates now. Meanwhile, when I asked for $50,000 to start a legitimate business with real clients and realistic projections, you told me I was too independent and needed to figure it out myself. We made mistakes, my dad said quietly. Yes, you did. But here's the thing about mistakes. They have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what people need to learn from their poor choices. I signaled the waiter for the check. So here's my answer to your request for help. No. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Ryan, please. You told me to figure it out myself when I needed help, so now I'm telling you the same thing. Figure it out yourselves. But we're family, my dad said desperately. Family works both ways. You didn't treat me like family when I needed support. You treated me like the responsible one who didn't deserve help. I stood up from the table. But I'm not completely heartless. I'll make Blake an offer. He can come work for me doing basic labor. Starting pay is $18 an hour. He'll show up on time, follow instructions, and earn every dollar. If he proves he can handle that for 6 months, maybe we'll talk about more responsibility. My dad looked hopeful. That's very generous. Don't thank me yet. Blake will have to swallow his pride and work for his brother doing manual labor. Based on his track record, I doubt he'll last a week. I put money on the table to cover my meal. The job offer stands for 30 days. After that, you're on your own. As I walked away, I could hear my mom crying quietly at the table. 2 weeks later, Blake showed up at one of my job sites. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing old clothes, and clearly having lost weight. Pride broken. Ryan, I need that job. What job? The labor position you offered. I need the work. I looked at him for a long moment. Why should I hire you? You've never finished anything you started. Because I don't have any other choice. Emma's gone. I'm living in mom and dad's basement, and I can't get hired anywhere else because word got around about the business failure. And you think you can handle taking orders from your twin brother? Blake's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll do whatever you need. I handed him a hard hat and work gloves. You start at the bottom. You'll be carrying materials, cleaning up job sites, and doing whatever the crew chiefs tell you. No special treatment because you're my brother. For 3 days, Blake actually showed up on time and worked hard. I was starting to think maybe he'd finally learned something. Then on Thursday morning, he didn't show up. When I called him, he said he'd found something better and wouldn't be wasting his potential on manual labor anymore. The something better turned out to be a multi-level marketing scheme selling overpriced supplements. Emma had come back into his life and convinced him this was his real opportunity to build wealth. She'd apparently been researching passive income opportunities while they were apart and had decided that network marketing was the future. Blake's new venture was with some company called Elite Wellness Solutions that sold protein powders and supplements at ridiculous markup prices. The business model was typical MLM garbage. Recruit other people to sell products and focus more on building your downline than actually selling to consumers. Emma was all over social media again, posting about financial freedom and entrepreneurial mindset. She changed her Instagram bio to digital marketing entrepreneur and started hosting Facebook Live sessions about breaking free from the 9-to-5 mindset. Blake spent $3,000 on an initial inventory package and another $2,000 on marketing materials. Within 3 months, he'd managed to recruit exactly 2 people into his downline, both college friends who bought starter packages out of pity. Blake's own sales totaled less than $500, mostly to family members who felt obligated to support him. 6 months later, that venture had also failed, and Blake was back to being unemployed and living with our parents. The supplement inventory was still sitting in their garage, slowly approaching expiration dates. Blake owed Elite Wellness Solutions money for additional products he'd ordered on credit, and Emma had once again disappeared from his life when the money ran out. Meanwhile, my business continued growing at a pace that surprised even me. I now have 8 employees, a workshop facility, and contracts booked out for the next year. I bought a house in a nice neighborhood and drive a truck that I own outright. My annual revenue hit $800,000 last year, and I'm on track for over $1.2 million this year. The success wasn't just financial. It was professional and personal satisfaction that I'd never experienced before. My clients respected my work, my employees looked up to me as a leader, and other contractors in the area knew me as someone who delivered quality projects on time and on budget. I was building something real and lasting, something that provided value to customers and created jobs for good people. My parents? They lost the house and had to move into a small rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. The house they'd lived in for 25 years, where Blake and I grew up, got foreclosed on after they defaulted on the mortgage payments. Dad's business got bought by a competitor for cents on the dollar after he defaulted on his loans. Mom's working extra hours at the credit union just to make ends meet, and she's talked about having to postpone retirement indefinitely. Blake is 30 years old and still living with them in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment, still looking for his big break. He sleeps on a pull-out couch in the living room because they can't afford a place with a 3rd bedroom. He's applied for dozens of jobs, but can't get hired anywhere because word has gotten around about his business failures and work history. The few interviews he's gotten have ended poorly because Blake still carries himself like someone who's too good for entry-level positions. The beautiful irony is that being treated as the independent one actually made me independent. While Blake learned to expect handouts and bailouts, I learned to rely on myself and build something real. Last month, Blake called me one more time asking for help. He'd heard I was doing well and wondered if I might consider investing in his latest business idea. I told him I was too busy with actual paying customers to discuss imaginary ventures.